Okay, can everybody see that? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure everybody can see the screens. Okay? Tomorrow's a big day. Okay, so that too. All right, I'm hardwired. So
You don't have
we're ready
the
to
odds
go.
up there, do you?
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, we will go ahead and start the Finance Committee meeting of the State School Board. First item, Deputy Jones. Or is it just
Sorry, it's
approval
approval
of
of the minutes.
The minutes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
We're
My
still
computer is
connecting.
Still booting up slow. But, does anyone have any comments on the minutes? I believe
Motion
that
to approve.
is no. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? The minutes are thus approved. Internet is still taking a long time to come alive. What is item two?
Item 2 is recognition of progress, achievements, or improvements. Now, yesterday, the whole board was introduced to the new employees. What I'd like to do right now is have Zach come up, and is Faye back there too? Zach and Faye come up for purchasing. I want you guys to tell a little bit more about your backgrounds and stuff to the Finance Committee members, so they get to know you a little bit better, since we're all one team, integrated, supportive, and synergetic. Great. So introduce yourselves, please, and tell them where you come from, your backgrounds, and all that. So,
All right.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Faye Tan. I came from state purchasing up at the state office building. Prior to that, I worked at DTS. This is actually my 5th state agency that I've worked for. And my background, I have a JD from the U. And so doing contracts up here sort of fits nicely with that, and I've really enjoyed my time here.
Zach Christensen. I also came from state purchasing. Before that, I was in private practice. I also have a law degree. I went to the University of Denver, family tradition. Out of 5 kids, 4 out of the 5 are attorneys, and so it's fun. So before private practice, I was actually with Lockheed Martin, and I was doing their subcontract management for their battery contracts. So I've been doing some form of procurement or contracts for a little while now. And so I'm really excited to be here. I think it's going to be a great opportunity, and I think we're really lucky to have Faye as well. It's going to really help, and we're going to hopefully do a great job in their procurement.
one other thing that I'd like to point out to members of the Finance Committee meeting is yesterday in the consent calendar, you designated Zach as the head of procurement. For newer board members, it was part of the process last year that we became our own procurement unit, basically. So we don't necessarily have to go through state purchasing at this point, because Zach serves as your head of procurement. The other piece to this too, so what that implies, or what that means, is if there's any like protests or anything like that, he's the one that would have to be the, I guess, adjudicator. Is that a fair?
Yeah, the protest officer.
Okay, protest officer, okay. And that's the reason too why we, not the reason, but one of the reasons why we've also hired Faye too, so that we can have that separation of duties and all that, to ensure that the procurement process all holistically are done properly and seamlessly moving forward on that too. So we felt like it was a good time for you to get oriented towards the staffing changes within procurement. It is part of financial operations, but there's also those separations too, but there's also that synergy as well, so. Too. So anything, any quick
Yeah,
thought?
give me an example of what someone would protest that you would be the protest officer for.
Well, great. We actually just had a protest recently. It was on one of our solicitations for the early warning, the dropout early warning software. A vendor was unhappy that they had been rejected, and so they protested that decision. And so, as a protest officer, I went back, reviewed the solicitation, made sure that everything was done in compliance with the code and rule, and we decisioned the protest and denied their protest as not being valid under the procurement code.
And then, would you also give me an example of, you talked about the division of duties so that these two would would kind of, that would be a more proper way to do it. Could you tell me an example of why that would be proper and how you would do one thing
Yeah.
and they would do another?
So,
Go ahead.
okay,
No.
so for example, with the protest, if we have one of the individuals who actually worked on the solicitation, they were the purchasing agent who actually drafted or ran the solicitation, they would not be able to be the protest officer because they would not be a separate part of that. They would be invested in that.
It would not be a neutral party.
Correct. So without having that separation as far as the agent who's working on the solicitation and a separate person to be the protest officer, we would have to send all of our protests back up to state purchasing for them to hear and make decisions on our behalf.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
Okay. Any other questions or?
Deputy Jones, you said something interesting. The state school board was not its own procurement unit until when?
Last year,
Do you
And-
remember
or
we had
well,
the
at the beginning of the
legislative-
state fiscal year, so.
Yeah.
Did it require legislative action? Why were we not our own?
It did, yes, and why weren't we?
Yeah.
Not sure about that, but, and yes, it did require legislative action. It also, as part of the legislative process, we became more of our own human resources, that we have some flexibility in the human resource realm. So it was all part of the bill. I believe Senator Milner sponsored it, was one of the sponsors, so, and then, so legislatively, we
big.
created our own procurement unit. It's similar to university, you know, structure within the procurement processes and all that. And we're currently working on a system, improving the system to better track procurement activities so that the staff amongst the different sections can also ensure that they have real-time updates on where particular RFPs are and all of that too. So that's what Zach and Faye and their crew are bringing to us in the future as well. So better systems, better processes. So, okay.
And if there are complaints about school districts or charter school RFP process, who handles that? Do you look into
Well,
that or?
so state purchasing actually has capability. They have an individual up there, I believe, or maybe one or two that actually works significantly with the LEAs, right? On that too.
They do.
So,
They
go ahead.
have, as they would be considered their own educational procurement unit, just like the board is now. We are our own separate educational procurement unit. So we can help them, but we wouldn't be over them as a kind of an oversight, but we can definitely help them. And that's one thing that we are working towards as well, as far
Who
as our
does
purchasing.
oversee them?
They are an independent procurement unit.
They have to follow state.
So they do. They have to follow procurement code and administrative rule. So they're obligated to follow those same practices.
And if they don't, then how can someone complain about a school district, for example?
They should
How-
have
how
their
does
own
the-
Yeah,
protest
they should have
officer.
like their own protest officers and that, but if, I mean, I guess it's an egregious one, they could still file a complaint with the Attorney General's office or with the auditors, and they would be able to kind of follow that process, but as an independent unit, they are kind of self-contained and they would be obligated to have that protest officer in that. But one of the things that we were trying to work towards is being a better resource and being able to have draft and sample procurement that they can follow. So example, draft RFPs that they can use for their procurements, but also be an asset as far as reaching out for some courtesy posting. So if they are unsure how to do things, then we can be a resource on their behalf and help guide them through that, or even post things on their behalf. So that's something that we are working towards, so that they are in full compliance with code and rule, and make sure that it's all done appropriately.
Interesting. I just think at the state school board, we should actually be overseeing that, but that's neither here nor there for now.
I was just gonna say that the LEAs out there that are having procurement challenges or a vendor or something, somebody's got a complaint, they start at the local level. If they're not happy with that, they take it to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office, they go mitigate through the whole process and make sure exactly what the code and procedures were followed. We're not that referee in there. We're not part of that process.
I just see as our general control and supervision of public education, I think that should fall within it. And I've been fairly unimpressed with the Attorney General's work on that to date. I think they should know that. So I'm glad we have you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate that, and hopefully we can, help them.
Good.
Just real quickly, one other staff member, Pat, come up here, please. So, get put on the spot here. So one of the key gaps that we recognized is because of the integration of both the school finance section and the internal accounting, so it's a pretty big section, that we needed some administrative support. So Pat, introduce yourself, tell them where you come from. We're glad you're here.
Very different background. So I started in finance with Lucadia, supporting Ian Cumming, who's the CEO. And then I went to Intermountain Healthcare, where I supported Dr. Sorensen, also the CEO. And just recently from finance with the Eccles family, so supporting a lot of high-level CEOs. And this
And what's
is
your last name, Pat?
Gardner.
Gardner.
This is very interesting, very different, trying to get up to speed on all of the different sections, the acronyms, and I've learned a lot in 3 weeks, and I'm really looking forward to it.
One of the things that we continue to have challenges with is the volume of paperwork that flows back and forth between the sections and all that too. There's been payment delays, different things like that. We're trying to get into better systems such as like DocuSign, where we can, have signatures done over all that type of, that type of platform basically, so we'll start to implement that. There's been some frustration among the staff too, but we really feel that by increasing the capacity, by bringing awesome people on like this, that we can streamline those processes and get payments done faster but efficiently. In the past, there was a tendency to robo-sign type things and get them just out the door, and do things without having sufficient backup. So you see those kinds of things come up in audits where, hey, you didn't have sufficient backup documentation and all that too. Now, that's not necessarily Pat's only role or anything. I'm not saying that that's what she does, but by increasing our administrative footprint, if you will, by personnel, we feel that the investment is well worth the future for how we work synergetically with the sections and all that, and especially in the procurement realm as well. So, too. So, sir, subject to any questions from you or the rest of the finance committee members, this is 1.2. So we've achieved, we never steal people, but we expertly acquire them from other sections, so we achieved that, and these obviously are your improvements right here, so, on the team too, so, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair,
Yes.
if I may, can I suggest that we go ahead and, so 1.3 is the 1.3 is the Common Data Committee update, but could we go to 1.4 in the interest of allowing staff to go to the other committees? 1.4 is the 122, or 122, Board of Education Procurement Amendment. So Zach, you may need to come back up here for this, sorry. And if Ben, if you could come up, subject to your approval, Chair, can we flip those two? Are you okay with that?
Deputy Jones and all staff, we're very mindful of your time, and sometimes it's fun to watch us, but please interrupt, and anytime if we can help get people in and out and on to many good things they need to do.
So with that, we'll jump to 1.4, R277-122 Board of Education Procurement Amendment. It was provided as backup documentation to you. I'll pull, so do you want me to go here first, or do you want to go to the, which one do you prefer?
I would go to the second one, yes.
Okay, this one?
Yes.
Okay, so, okay, go ahead and take it away, subject to the
Okay.
chair's direction.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so with this, when the Board of Education went independent, we adopted R33, which is the administrative rules for procurement. With that, as we've gone through, we've noticed that there are some things that we need to adjust that would work better on behalf of the board. And so we've made a couple of proposed changes. Some of these include making sure that our rules match those of the federal regulation, CFR, to make sure that we are in compliance with the federal regulation. So if we go down, I can quick.
Yeah, tell me one line.
Okay.
Page. Is it red
Or
line?
page.
Yeah. It is page 4, line 103. Okay, so according to CFR, the micro purchase threshold is $3,500, and that doesn't require multiple quotes or bids. You can just contract directly with a vendor. And so under the current state rule R33, we have two different thresholds. We have one as an individual line item of $1,000 and aggregate of $5,000 per purchase. Under the federal rules, the aggregate is $3,500. So what we proposed is just changing that so that it's a aggregate of $3,500 per purchase, which makes it in compliance with the federal laws. We're trying to make sure that we mirror our rules so that we don't kind of get in any jeopardy or risk anything, so that we've fully complied with that. So with that, we have also gone down to R33 or R27. Wow. it's early.
277.
There we go. 277122-11 on 149. And this is adjusting the small purchase of professional service providers. That is currently in R33, and we made a similar adjustment here where under the current just state rule R33, there's a threshold of $100,000 where you can contract directly with the provider after reviewing the qualifications of at least 3 individuals and determining who is the most qualified. As that is in conflict with the federal rule, we decided to make an adjustment to that as well, so that you can contract directly up to $3,500 by direct negotiation after determining who's the most qualified, or up to $100,000 by obtaining quotes from those 3 individuals as well, and then making a best value determination, so that we are in compliance with the federal regulations as well. So those were the 2 major changes we were trying to adjust the rules for the board. Yes.
I have some concern with having to obtain quotes from 3 service providers. It seems, potentially onerous. I mean, in some areas there is, but in some more unique areas, it could be quite onerous. I mean, there's one thing, you post it, you give people a chance. You might even say, send a request, we would like you to bid to 3 service providers and provide evidence of that. But now you're saying they have to go out and get 3 quotes. So they may have 2 quotes, and it might take another week, 2 weeks of banging and badgering people to get the 3rd quote. That's not exactly adding value. I mean, why? Can you tell me the economics or the policy why getting 3 quotes instead of just putting it out there, or getting 2
Yes.
quotes even?
Yes, so with that, we actually have another rule in place where if you cannot obtain multiple quotes, you can do the evaluation to determine whether those quotes are reasonable and fair, and that you can accept even down to 1, where if you can show that you've reached out to all reasonable and responsible parties that you know of, you've posted it, you've done other things. So we have other rules in place to address that. But with this, we do want to make sure that if we are going out for professional service, that we've actually reached out and actually evaluated and said, hey, are you interested in providing the service? If you are, how much would you charge for it? And then the board would make that determination of whether they're qualified. If we reach out to multiple individuals and they say we're not interested, we've met that obligation, we've met that burden under R33-4109. So we have that provision in place where you don't have to get that, but that's on an individual basis where we'd have to make that evaluation. But there's not kind of that strict hard line where if you don't have 3 quotes, you can't proceed. We have other rules in place to address that.
So did you reference another rule that says
Yes.
that if you don't get the 3 quotes?
Yes.
Why don't we have it all in one? Why don't we just have it all in one rule? Why don't we just have the whole thing all in one place? Because I'm with Joel a little bit, and I don't know if you're talking about only from your professional experience. And I'm just speaking from my own when I have a public entities seeking service, or an investor-owned utilities as a public service commission, and say the service is so unique, it's very difficult to get that 3rd. Sometimes it's difficult to get a 2nd.
Yes.
But why not have it all in one place?
Because some of those rules apply to multiple scenarios. For example, with the one that I referenced, where 2 quotes cannot be obtained, that applies to quotes, to bids, to proposals, and that as well. So if we have just one rule, instead of having that duplicated in each section of the rules, and that's currently in R33, which we adopted in total when we went independent. So that rule is currently in statute. This would be an amendment which would apply only to the board, and that would supersede the current rule that we have for small purchase rule and for the purchase of professional services and consultants.
I'm just saying, if I was a vendor, I don't know how many vendors we have in the room, but it would be nice to have that so they could navigate to know where it all is. That's what they're getting to it, so.
Should we ask them to revise it to make it more clear?
I'm just saying it.
R33,
Can we
yes.
go with-
So
I'm just
that's,
saying on the procurement, it's not just for, not for vendors, but for people in sections as they're going out, that they don't have to have an attorney in their section trying to sort through all of that.
So we're going to go Board Member Cannon and then Cummins.
This is just a quick clarification. So the 3 quotes are required for any purchases over $3,500 and up to $100,000. Is that correct?
correct.
Board Member Cummins.
So, just understanding the need for repetitiveness and not, so you're saying that we have adopted R33 as, what, blah, 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 number, as our
Correct.
procurement, but this rule is just saying except for.
Correct. So we have
Exceptions too.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yeah, so we currently have R33 adopted in its entirety, and we're replacing portions of R33 with rules that would apply only to the board. And this is one where we've found that this would be more in line with federal rules and that, and I think would be more effective for the board. And we are going through, all the R33, and as we find things that we think would be better, suited for the board, that we can make those adjustments and make that a little bit easier. So without rewriting all of R33 kind of at this time to kind of incorporate that, this is how we're addressing some of those issues we find along the way.
Yeah, I think maybe the one thing that we could do if there's a concern about them being on notice of this exception is we might be able to reference the exception that's contained in R33 specifically in these sections, say something to the effect of except as provided in R33,
Or
whatever the provision is, this is the rule. If there's a concern that the vendors wouldn't be on notice of that, or
On 162, service providers or consultants determined, obtaining quotes from them, or determined, I think it's determined, past tense instead of determined in writing.
I'll fix that.
I appreciate the zeal with which we want to save money, but I think unless, where's the exception to obtaining 3 quotes? And also, this still can be like a club where there's just like 3 preferred people and they just pass it around instead of posting it and letting, potentially new people compete. I would rather, I know from my experience, and Mark has a lot of experience in this too, I think it's more fair to simply post it for a week, in a clear place where people can find it, and, 2 quotes at the most, and I think that was more likely to get good deals than just requiring the 3 quotes. But unless someone misses something, Board Member Cummins?
And I would think that we have the ability to do anything above and beyond a rule, right? We said a rule is the minimum requirement. And if we have a certain area that's less than that $100,000 maximum that we want to get posted, I don't think there's anything that would stop us from doing so, is there?
Correct. No, this is a rule authorizing kind of a deviation from just doing a standard competitive either bid or proposal. So this is another alternative to actually doing kind of these more smaller procurements. We use this a lot when we have different sections do training and teaching development, and those usually run between $1,000 and $2,500. And so this is one way that we are kind of facilitating that process as well. Instead of doing an RFP for one course that's going to run $1,200, and that's going to cost the board a lot more to run that entire RFP than it would be to have kind of an exception for a one course training. This is not meant to supplant the RFP process, especially when it's something that is important or something that has high visibility or something that we really want to make sure we have a best value, where we have different solutions in that. This is just another tool that we have, and currently we have the small purchase rule under R33, which lets us negotiate directly up to $100,000. So this is actually kind of reining it in a little bit more, as far as kind of making sure that we're kind of evaluating a little bit more fairly and doing that.
I think this is well worth spending some time on. This is millions of dollars.
So when Mike's coming up, this is why we wanted to make sure we took a little bit more time introducing you to Zach and to Faye, because we knew this was on the agenda, so that we can talk through this and make sure that we do it, because procurement has always been a challenge in the past, and because we're our own procurement unit, we want to make sure we get this right. So, yes, please, whatever time you need, the staff are here to support.
So, please, where is the exception? I mean, if it's hard to get 3 quotes, because otherwise it seems to make more sense, no more than 2 quotes and post it for a week.
So if you look at 162, word number right, you'll see that it's, the language there, I think is, you go out and get 3 quotes, or if that's not possible, a superintendent can make a determination that you've got qualified vendors and move forward.
I think the specific exception Zach said is in R33, which is the general procurement rules which have been established for the whole state. Where the rules here are kind of the exceptions that we've kind of pulled apart for the Board of Education.
Right. But in our rule, that's the exception to the 3 is in line 162.
That's the general rule, it's in 162. They have to get 3 quotes, and then the superintendent determines.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's an and, so they have to.
Or consultants.
So this
Determine in
seems
writing
like
whether
it's
she would be
more
qualified.
fiscally responsible to not go through so many steps to spend a small amount of money. So that's kind of why we're establishing this policy, so that it's more fiscally responsible instead of spending oodles of time putting out an RFP, asking for vendors. So this would be like a one-time deal that we're using for,
Correct.
so it would be like non-discretionary funds almost, but with some more guidelines in place. So to me, it seems like it's just more fiscally sound to truncate the system instead of spending all this money to spend a smaller amount of money. So it's only up to $100,000, but if it goes, but it still follows some of the same rules. So it's just providing a little bit more leeway as things become more expensive. We have up to
It's actually getting us in compliance with the federal rules. See, the complicated thing about procurement here is that we have to comply with both state procurement code as well as the education department procurement rules if there's even a penny of federal funding involved, which usually there is. And so our procurement kind of model here is more complex than it would be in many places because we have to keep track of rules. So it's actually was Zach's team examining the federal rule that one of the reasons was, hey, this federal rule requires that we actually make this more narrow and go obtain, multiple quotes for this professional service area. But you're right, remember, it's just this niche. It's not everything certainly that we buy, but it's this niche of professional services and consultants, which consumes a ton of time, and which we're just trying to be more efficient. That's actually the exact bottom line. We're just trying to be more efficient here and be fair at the same time.
I want to go at the law, but I want them to be as efficient as possible. Deputy Jones?
And so that goes to my earlier statement about frustrations we've had from staff about, how cumbersome this is. We are really actually trying to do a good job of balancing regulatory requirements with process type activities where, and sometimes we enter into agreements with providers from within LEAs and all that too, and rightfully so. That's for, to support that, but then they get frustrated with how long it takes to get the quotes and do all these types of things too. We are really trying to balance that scale or that equation of how do we maintain or sustain regulatory or requirements, how do we comply with audit standards, do all those types of things, but yet, make sure that we are fiduciarily responsible for our money, and how we award dollars. So we recommend that this be one of those ways to do that. We'll test it, we'll evaluate it, and we would come back to you with it, if it wasn't working or anything like that, so.
Deputy Jones, tell me the truth. I mean, I got BI here, and BI looks so onerous. I would guess that 90% of the time you'll default to B2. So it might make more sense to make BI less onerous, so that you actually do it.
1 and 2 are, it's an and, you have to do, you do both
And,
steps.
oh, I thought it was
Yeah,
or.
no, we have to do both.
2 is just saying you review the
Yeah.
quotes and the
So on
superintendent makes a
163,
determination.
if I
So-
may, on line 163, you gotta focus on that and.
I'm
'Cause
sorry,
it's-
it's good.
you're fine, 1 and 2 are linked.
Then what if you can't get quotes from 3 people? And how, and when do you know that you've reasonably tried?
That actually is codified in that rule as well. Would you like me to share what that says?
And,
Okay.
and is this federal? I mean, can we go to 2, or can we just go posting? Why is it obtain quotes from 3? Is that, Deputy Jones, think that's best practice, or is it required by federal law?
That was federal. That's why we put that in there, is
Oh, really?
obtaining the quotes, because that's required under the federal regulation.
So we have a compliance
Oh, that's
piece here.
pretty darn onerous.
Well,
But if it's required by
sure.
federal, that's what I needed now.
Yeah,
Okay.
So
So
that's.
just tell me,
yes.
now, how is federal weighing into what we procure in Utah? Why do we have all these federal guidelines?
Because
How
of
do they
federal
relate to
dollars.
us?
Right.
Oh, these are federal dollars.
Because
Oh,
the
well, that makes sense.
If I may, the procurements that we do, we use federal dollars to
Okay.
pay for too, so we have to comply.
And so they get to have guidelines because it's their
Correct.
money.
Exactly.
I get it.
And that's what makes it
I mean,
more
not in every
complicated for
case.
us.
Yeah.
Not in every case, we use state money in
Yeah.
every case. But see, not so much that it would tie exactly to procurement, but we are very conscientious about all the different standards that are applied to us, either by the federal government or even by our own office of the state auditor, right, who says he'll audit to federal standards, and this is where we get into, like DLI grants, all these type of things. I know those grants don't exist anymore, but all these types of things, we want to demonstrate, the staff wants to demonstrate to the board and to the taxpayer that we are improving, that we are learning and looking and trying to make sure we don't repeat some of the mistakes we have made in the past. It doesn't say we won't make mistakes, but we are really trying to make a conscientious effort to balance regulatory requirements with process and delivery timelines.
So this onerous BI, 3 quotes, that's federal requirement. That's not us going beyond the mark.
I believe that was the federal in Edgar.
All right.
That's why we did it. But I think what Zach is trying to explain here is that this is so called. So you've got the Utah Procurement Code, and you've got the Utah Procurement Rule, and now we have a USBE procurement rule that supplements that. Overall, you've got the Department of Education procurement rule. So the Utah procurement rule rescues us here by coming in and saying, guess what, you can consider that you have fulfilled your requirement to obtain 3 quotes if you do these things which amount to making reasonable efforts. And that's what Zach's trying, he can explain. That's so, there is an out, remember, right? There is an out in the Utah rule definition of what it means to go and make reasonable efforts to obtain a quote. So it isn't as stringent as it appears in our rule, and maybe our rule, we could change our rule to go back and maybe reference this to make it so that if someone is just reading our rule, they wouldn't get the impression that it's 3 votes or nothing. There is this kind of latitude in the higher level Utah rule, which allows us to show that we've made reasonable efforts. So that may be something you would like us to do.
No,
I think Brittany
and
goes
then
ahead.
Mark.
I move that we approve R 277122 with reference to R 33 in the section for the exceptions of the 3 quotes. And I can't find that
You
one.
send me that reference, I can all get
Yep.
it incorporated.
I think we have some further discussion, if that's okay. Mark?
Can you speak to the dollar amounts, how they were chose?
The $3,500, that is the current micro purchase threshold from the federal government. So that's why we have that threshold. The $100,000 threshold, that is the current threshold under the state procurement administrative rules for professional services and consultants. So we have kind of just adjusted the micro purchase threshold to incorporate that into there.
Thank you.
And Superintendent, Deputy Jones, do you and Superintendent Dixon think this is reasonable? It's not going to impose undue burdens and it's the
Yes.
efficient way, even though,
Yeah, Superintendent Dixon is very interested in the balance, so this is something I believe she would be willing to support. Of course, we gotta test it and make sure. The thresholds, with $1,000 that we've had in the past and all that too, it's just a high volume of activity. We feel confident that because of the individuals we have in place, because of the controls that we've been implemented, that by going to $3,500, it allows for some of this, the mitigation against some of these concerns that, oh man, because you talk about the word, onerous on this stuff too. The $1,000 limit was very onerous on that too. So now we're kind of balancing that equation a little bit, trying to open this up a little bit more, but not sacrificing the integrity of the fiduciary responsibility or the compliance part. So I believe both myself and Superintendent Dixon are supportive of this change.
I can support this, but I want staff to feel very liberally inclined if when it's not working to come and tell us and we can modify it appropriately.
We are so inclined, sir.
Good. Okay, Board Member Cummins has made a motion. All in favor, say aye.
I'm,
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. I think we are back to 1.3. Yes, sir.
Can I make a clarification while I'm sitting up here, remember right about the
Yeah.
role of the Attorney General in this whole process based on comments made earlier, and I was sitting back there and didn't want to interrupt the meeting. So it seemed to be that the belief of the board was that if LEAs have a procurement issue in the districts, that there's some kind of, Attorney General Ombudsman's office that they can go to, and that's not the case.
No, not at all.
You know that if there's each of the LEAs have their own attorneys, they have to abide by the Utah Code. They can get into protests and litigations and resolve it at that level. If there's kind of a systematic problem that our audit team may pick up or the state audit team may pick up, then they can go to state procurement, which would have, overall responsibility to try to look at systematic issues. And then they are indeed advised by an attorney general who's assigned, to that division to advise them. But at least so far, there is no, I just want to dispel that notion. There is no kind of like attorney general office that's assigned to try to overlook and monitor and help the LEA whole procurement effort. So just, is that okay if I
the
make
one
that
thing is that
clarification?
it doesn't route through us.
Right,
That's
right.
what-
No,
that's what
that's,
we need to make
that's right. It
sure.
really doesn't. They have their own attorneys. They're an independent procurement unit, and they're advised by an attorney general that advises state procurements.
It's so riddled with conflicts of interest. I mean, if the University of Utah, you do a procurement, you're unhappy with it, Attorney General's office defending the University of Utah, and then you file a complaint with the Attorney General's office. The Attorney General goofed up on the University of Utah procurement, and the Attorney General's investigating the Attorney General goof up.
Sir, no argument. It really, yeah, for a vendor in the Utah procurement system, you really just need to go hire a good independent lawyer and take it, and, you know, take it through the appeals process to the Utah Court of Appeals. There is remedy, but it's probably, once you pierce through the bureaucracy, just as you described, right? Sorry, I just wanted to make that clarification. That's all right.
Okay. I think we're back to 1.3, Common Data Committee updates. Deputy Jones?
Chair, if you invite Travis Rawlings up to the table, Jamie Barrett.
Please come
Those two,
join us.
please. We'd like, or respectfully request that Travis lead out on the discussion once Jamie's up. So do you want me to pull one particular thing up?
I would refer to that only on this one. So, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Travis Rawlings. I'm the Educator Licensing Coordinator for the board. And in the past month, we've had an issue arise where essentially there was mistakes made internally with our staff regarding a funding source and a timeline and a deadline. So the simplest possible version is for educator salary adjustments to be funded for LEAs, an individual must have a license as of November 15th of the school year. Because of some oversights on our staff and some changes, and I can get into details if you'd like, there are approximately 55 individuals that should have had a license on that date that didn't. I think it was 55, wasn't it? Yeah. 55 that should have had a license on that date, and it was our staff's fault that they did not. And then beyond that, as we started to look at that, we looked a little bit closer just to make sure we had all the information possible. And there's a threshold. I mean, there are other situations. Every year there are districts and situations where a person doesn't get funded, and so where this one had an error on our staff, there were new procedures this year because there were no licensing fees for the first time, and so districts and charters were dealing with new procedural issues, though they weren't drastically different. There were some changes. And ultimately, we've kind of made a breakdown of the different numbers of people affected. Some people just barely missed a deadline. Some people did not do what they were instructed to do with the trainings and the documentations that were distributed. And so ultimately, we're coming to the board to ask how you would like us to fix this. How would you like us to proceed? Ultimately, we feel very strongly that we should adjust the educator salary adjustment based on at least at a minimum, the ones that were our staff's fault. But we need the board's approval to do that. And then beyond that, go from there.
Deputy Jones?
So in the document I have up on the screen here, this is exactly what Travis is speaking to as number one here, correct, Travis?
Yes.
And then the staff make a recommended action. The board authorizes staff to run new Cactus data query for the LEA impacted by these reporting errors and use this data to calculate the amount due to the LEAs in the mid-year update for 18. There's adequate funds in the budget. We could certainly do that. We're a learning and improving organization, so in the future, we'd be able to not, repeat the factor of the 55 on that part too. So I did want to just slow the discussion down before we go into the next, like number two, and all that too, if you guys are okay with that. Because that's what Mr. Rawlings or Travis is pointing out here, is that, too. The other concern though I have is that, we're asking for board approval, but we really need to move on this, right? Because, the finance committee is today, too, so we just like maybe a motion that supports doing this, that we can move on this and then report back to the outcome on the board in the January meeting, if that's.
So, just to kind of clarify a little bit, the exact reason we're bringing this to the board, largely staff have the ability to make adjustments. in the case of this one, rule specifically states at what date we are to run a poll from Cactus. So any adjustment at this point would be you, the board, directing us to use a different data set than is currently established in statute. That's reason one we're bringing this to you. Reason two, this data poll is generated, it generates a supplemental appropriation that we have to put in front of the LFA and the governor's office as part of the budget request. We did that in accordance with the rules and guidelines when we noted, and I just wanted to bring this up to you in case it comes up later. When we noted the data anomalies, when we noted that the supplemental appropriation was about half of what it usually is, that seems strange. And as staff started digging into it, the document that you're looking at are the reasons, the data anomalies that we looked at, because that appropriation looks strange to us. We were able to work with the LFA and GOMB to add some additional funds to that supplemental appropriation outside of the generally negotiated discussion in order to give the board the ability to make decisions. Because again, as Mr. Rawlings indicated, there are some procedural changes this year, a lot of confusion. We've had concerns about confusion regarding dates. In order to get these licenses approved, they have to make it on a board agenda on your consent calendar, be approved and then updated in the Cactus system before November 15th. A lot of LEAs, for whatever reason, think that they don't have to turn things in until November 15th. And so there's various categories on the sheet. The first category, we all felt, as we discussed it as staff, that it was an issue that occurred here in the office. There's no reason that the teachers or the LEA should be penalized. So we're asking for approval to modify the data polls and pay those LEAs, which we would do Monday. So we would need approval to do that.
As I'm looking through this, you're not just complete Santa Claus here. You're saying, people who didn't meet it by November 15th, we are holding them to some standards. And those 155 educators, it's not our fault at all.
Correct.
It's their fault, because we want to send the message to the community that they do need to do something, but the others are our mistakes. So give us, how much less pay are these, 260 or so teachers going to get if we don't do something?
It's $5,214 is what the ESA's amount is.
So 4,100 goes to the educator, and
Correct. And the rest is benefits.
All right. Well, that's a lot. So, have you told us the solution, or are we supposed to come up with a solution? That would really be scary.
We tried to do these in stages so that it wouldn't, this is kind of a complicated issue. So the first group is the group that Mr. Rowley indicated. There are definitely oversights or things that occurred here. We believe those teachers should have been funded. The LEA should be funded for those teachers. We need you to authorize us to make that happen. We have sufficient funds to do that for those 55 teachers. It would cost $286,809, and we have that in the supplemental appropriation. So we're asking for your permission to go modify rule
And rerun a query.
And do we have the authority to give that to you right now before the January meeting, legally? Yes, no, or?
I am not an attorney.
Yeah,
I think so.
so I think that the motion can be made. I think you can make the motion to tell us to, because we would do this anyway. We would have to do, we would have to make the adjustments. We're trying to be transparent in the different situations that occurred based on the changes that were made too. So the challenge is that when we say this, because in the past there was always concerns that staff would take actions and do things without the board being notified of it. And so we try to strike that balance between, what goes on the main board agenda, but what could go into finance committee meeting. The processes that we take to do this aren't necessarily always have to be board approved, because it's a staff action anyway. So again, I'm not an attorney, but the attorneys might disagree and say, no, you absolutely have to make, they're saying, no, we can't do it, so.
I would also think that we could rate to update this entire line item for the whole state until January.
Yeah.
If you wanted us, I don't know what kind of a
Update these
I
on.
mean, the next board meeting is only in 3 weeks, or about that time too, so, I mean, if you want to make the motion and we wait until we take any action on it too, then we can do that too. we just want to make sure that we're very clear that then that'll make a little bit more time on this too, so that's what we have to do. Does that make sense?
Kathy and Brittany, did I see hands?
Yeah.
Kathy?
So, as a teacher, I received an email from my employer that stated that our Cactus and on-track Midas wasn't working. Is this part of that issue? Okay. So, the email that I received was saying that if you had a lane change or anything, that we weren't really able to.
So if you'd like me to speak to that, so the transition from on-track to Midas has created a situation where teachers have credits that they cannot document yet because we have not transitioned. And so districts have been struggling to deal with how to, deal with lane changes. That is a completely separate issue than this.
So my follow-up to that is that I think that we should be investing in making sure that we are taking care of our teachers. It's just, when I read this, and now I'm hearing this, I find it upsetting that our teachers aren't really getting the money that they're working for. Which brings us back to our point last night about getting these stipends and stuff like that. I think that we aren't supporting our teachers as well as we can, and I think that sometimes they do get lost in the shuffle, and we create all these rules to benefit our teachers, but sometimes they're left behind. So I think that I would make a motion that we support paying these teachers the money that they've worked for and the money that they've earned.
Okay, we have a motion. Is that specific enough?
I think we're gonna have to go through them step by step,
Okay.
because they each
That's
have
why I
different
slowed it down,
questions.
because, that too, so.
Is that okay?
If this is related, if the motion is related to number one,
Mhm.
then, it's fine.
Should we, do you want to narrow it to number one?
Sure.
before we-
I make a motion to authorize and receive, should I do the recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. I make a motion to, support recommendation one. Or should I read the whole thing?
No, I think they know what number one is. We're
Okay.
probably just subject to as soon as we can legally, permissibly do, or approval by the full board, if required by our attorneys.
Okay.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that passes unanimously. Let's go on to the more complicated stuff, I think. Travis?
I just wanted to make a clarification, and Natalie and Jamie and I have discussed this a lot, and quite frankly, to some of Board Member Reeby's comments, it is open to interpretation whether or not this funding source means that the teacher wouldn't receive this funding, or if the LEA simply wouldn't receive the funding to give the teacher. Under the statute, the way the rules are written, it's actually debatable on how they put it in their salary schedules about who's losing money on this situation, just so you know.
Okay. So this is another question that people have brought up to me, that each LEA doesn't have the same process for getting their licensure changing and track
Lane
changing.
changes and, yeah.
And it's very upsetting for, I had a teacher talk to me for about a year, and she had submitted her paperwork for about a year. And so when I think about let's give these people stipends, it just seems very disingenuous to me that we can't provide a system that, if I finish my class on Tuesday, every LEA across the whole entire state should be able to change your funding for the next pay period, because we work really hard. We go to school while we're teaching school. We are busting our butts to get as many qualifications as we can, and then to have not a set policy for every teacher to receive the money that they've worked to get on a timely fashion is upsetting to me. And I think it should be a uniform policy across the state through every LEA, because to hear these stories, and it's not just one story, it's countless stories about how one district only pays you at the end of the year, one district pays you halfway through the year, one district lost my paperwork 16 times. Well, that should be prorated, and you should have your paperwork. I mean, it should not always be the teacher's burden to jump through 7,000 hoops when the hoops are on fire and moving at all times. I mean, I really think that this is something that, if we're looking to improve the experience teachers are having, that we should really work to create a system that's well maintained by our IT department, has the money to support it, so that it is as robust and as complicated as the process of teachers and the credentials that they're receiving at all times. So, thank you.
Before we move on, Board Member Reeby's
Tired.
insightful comments, you know, just trying to add value to the system, to her credit. Why don't we make that an agenda item next month? And it's not, you know, specific, but try and ask our staff to look into the problems and the regular practice, and if we need to make a rule or provide guidance to our LEAs, because clearly you're hearing a lot of anecdotal stories. Is this just a few, you know, minor mistakes, or is it, you know, leading teachers on a regular basis to have to go down to Czech City and sell future salary to fund mortgage payments, car payments, and heaven forbid, a little bit of Santa Claus at their house?
Is there a way that we could possibly make it a universal process for every LEA? I don't know if we have that.
Well, I think that we're talking about two different things right now. I think that the issue that we're trying to address is specifically towards educators who have a current teaching assignment but haven't received an authorization for the current year. I think the issue that you're discussing is related to maybe changing steps and lanes,
Yep.
or which is largely a local HR policy. And right now, we don't set HR policies for districts.
Is there a way for us to do that then?
We can investigate that, like, for anything.
Board Member, I
I would not like
I'm-
to put anything else on your plate during this trying time. I would like to, if you could maybe find a time in your schedule that's a little less robust than legislative session.
Please, Brenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cindy Dixon, State Superintendent. When we were looking at 53A, 8A maybe, when we were looking at all of the work that Senator Osmond did around teacher evaluation, this was a conversation that came up during that time period in investigating if we have some statewide guardrails in policy around educator evaluation, could the same be true then for a statewide pay scale? There were some legislators at the time who were very interested in that, and it comes up from time to time. So if you had a statewide policy, meaning in code that it was codified, that there was a statewide pay system, then you would have more jurisdiction to provide HR governance. But at this time, because that's all done locally, it's pretty hard to piecemeal then say, we demand this policy statewide that governs HR, but not this policy. So as long as we have individual negotiated agreements, that it's pretty hard to pull something out and do it statewide. And we can follow up with you, Board Member Reeby, on the Midas piece, just so the public, anybody that's listening, we did send out transcript or notification that in the transition, we sent out multiple notifications that all teachers needed to download their transcripts in the transition so that they would have those. So you've got the district policies that you're talking about that are problematic or can be problematic, and then there are procedures that we did try to mitigate knowing that we were going to have that transition. We can certainly do more, some more investigation about what you're asking for. I just think the lift, I know when we were looking at 53.8A into that whole piece around employment made it, that's where you would find it. So that's maybe a section of code to look at and see if you'd recommend some changes there.
Board Member Reeby.
I understand negotiated contracts on a local level. I'm asking for guardrails to say that everybody from here all the way up to our senators are like, we really need our teachers to get professional development, we really need them to be innovative, and yet there is a delay on my pay after I'm innovative in some districts. So just to maybe put in some guardrails to say within 30 days you should receive compensation for your professional development. Or, does that make sense?
Yeah, so you'd like a statutory look at, could something like that be put in statute?
That, because it is, and I've heard many stories about how it took them 6 months to get their pay. And, you know, this might be $1,000 a year it's still, it's a lot of time to resubmit your paperwork over and over and over again. It should be timestamped from when you send it in, and that should be the day that you receive your funding, you know? So, to have to resend it and redo it is really burdensome for these teachers.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
So, thank you so much for the care, I appreciate it.
Board member comments?
And if I, I agree entirely on an employee level. I think one of the concerns we may have, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm gonna say that over and over, because please do if I'm wrong. But I believe not all LEAs use steps and lanes, and they don't use the same procedure, and so if we were to try and create a statewide policy, it wouldn't fit every LEA's, we wouldn't be able to construct something that could possibly fit everybody's pay scale or way that they pay or reward or change a teacher's salary based on professional development. So that's the concern I have with finding a solution at the state level.
Kathleen, would you like to make this an information item to discuss at the next finance committee meeting? Because we easily need to get to resolving these
Yeah,
minor issues, so these couple hundred teachers can hopefully get paid right now.
Can I make it an information item for, June?
June?
I just don't wanna put anything on your plate right now. I think that going into legislative session is
All
really
right. Well,
stressful.
I will
And so,
second that to the extent that a second is necessary. Natalie and Scott, can you put it on the June agenda for further discussion? And right now, we will try and see how we can figure out how to get these teachers paid, so they
Thank you.
don't have to go to Check City.
And then, do you want me to walk
Natalie.
you through the second?
Yes,
point?
please.
So to briefly summarize, there are numerous LEAs. So we gave you the list of LEAs and the number of specific individual, it's a summary count, it's not by individual teacher. In another area of the board backup, it's called December 7th authorizations. We summarized them here to make the conversation quicker. There are 260, I believe, LEAs that for one reason or another, either the LEA didn't send in the authorization request list, or they sent it in after the October 15th deadline. One of the kind of mitigating factors, I guess, if you will, is that the October 15th deadline is sort of what we term a soft deadline. It's the deadline that we instruct in training. LEAs have to get that in order to make it on the board agenda so that it can follow the process and get updated into Cactus for all those individuals who need authorizations granted by the board. Again, this is just specifically authorizations, not anything else. For these 260 educators, their LEA either didn't send the list in, which they are required to do in order for our staff to know they need to be evaluated and put before the board, or they sent the list in and the list was late. So there's a couple of questions that we have. Ultimately, this happens annually when we have people who miss the deadline. This just happened in kind of a larger batch than it usually does. As Mr. Rawlings indicated, there's two decisions that need to be made. One, the rule clearly states right now that if their records aren't accurately reflected on November 15th, that the Board of Education does not provide funding to the LEA. We would like to know, one decision point is whether you would like that to remain our stance this year. The second decision point is if the Board of Education does not provide funding to the LEA, is the LEA still required to pay the teacher? The teachers in this instance, and the 260 that were evaluated by licensing staff, the teachers had their background checks completed and all their documentation was in order. So they met the criteria of being eligible. Is that correct?
From what they could control, yes.
Right. So the only part that makes them ineligible at this point, potentially, is the fact that their LEA didn't report them in on time. And so there's kind of two parts. The teacher did what they were supposed to, the educator did what they were supposed to do. The LEA, for whatever reason, did not. Misunderstanding of timelines, forgot, misinterpreted, and we need to know how you want us to couch those two scenarios.
was there an LEA that was highlighted with more teachers than another LEA? Is
Yes.
this LEA specific, or is it a general across the whole entire state?
List of maybe. So there were two LEAs, rather large LEAs that, the December presentation. So, right,
For some reason, they're 4 pages.
So,
Right there, oh, stop. So if you scroll back up, there's the 89 from current.
yeah, so this 89 right here from Granite School District. So Granite School District, Nebo School District, and I think Wasatch Waldorf were the ones that had the biggest number of individual educators that were not evaluated, or our staff didn't receive the list, if you will.
Or received the list after.
Or we received the list after. And so, I think one of the school districts indicated that they didn't think they had to send in the list because they didn't have to pay this year. And in the past, the list always accompanied the check that was required to pay the fee. And so that, even though there was instruction provided to the LEAs, and we provided that document too in the backup, the instructions that were sent out and training that was provided, for whatever reason, these LEAs didn't get that information. And so it is reasonable to think that there are numerous LEAs where you have 4 here. For some of our charter schools, even though they're smaller numbers, like 5 or 6, for some of the charter schools, they have 20 teachers, but right now only 5 were made it into the November 15th poll. And so the rest of those teachers the LEA would not receive funding for them at this point, and that seems to be on a smaller scale, relatively impactful to the LEA. So.
I think there's another important clarification, just that Nebo and Wasatch Waldorf, that represents the majority, I like all of their authorizations. For Granite, that is actually, while it looks like a high number, is part of their authorization. So they did some right, some not, whereas the others, it was just kind of all or nothing. That kind of thing.
Kathleen and Brittany?
I would make a motion that we pay the LEAs and support that. I think that as we look at this though, the bigger problem is that we have such high turnover in our schools. In previous years, as a teacher, we'd be hiring 100 teachers in Granite District. This year we hired 600 teachers. This is creating a tremendous burden on our teachers, and this is creating a tremendous burden on the whole entire system. So as we look to our policies to provide support for our schools, it's to me, I just keep seeing how this high turnover is not just high turnover of teachers, it's high turnover, and it's exhausting for our staff. I worked in a classroom where my kids came and went all the time, and to re-register kids in the class every other day, to have somebody walk in the door and then walk out, walk in the door, walk out, walk in the door, walk out. It's not just having a qualified teacher in the classroom, it's this constant changing of the guard, changing of a lot of paperwork. So when we look at teacher retention and teacher turnover, it's not just having teachers in the classroom, it's also really putting a strong burden on the whole entire system that I don't think our systems are really almost prepared to handle. I mean, we have thousands of teachers leaving at a high rate, and we have thousands coming in, and they're not making it 5 years, which means we have thousands more coming in. So as we look to make our policies, I think we should recognize that it's not just, when we say teacher turnover, it's not just sad for the teachers, it's really hard on our system, really hard on our system. And so this is just another indication of how we might see further breakdowns because we have such high turnover and such large volumes of people coming and going. So, thank you.
Brittany?
So you broke this down into 2 different cost categories. The one at $286,000, and then this next group is an additional $1,355,000. And when you talked about earlier about making sure that was square with the legislative office and GOMB, was that number the $1 million part of that negotiation?
Yes, so the original supplemental request was for $1.6 million, which is about half of what we usually ask for, and that's what kind of triggered our concern. We were able to get it adjusted to $2.5 million, which encompasses an additional around 180 teachers, or 180 educators. I think, did I do that math right? We also have an additional $1.5 million in carryover funds related to this program. So from the monetary aspect, we feel that the resources exist that enable you to make whatever decision you feel is appropriate. There are resources available. We just need authorization to deviate from the requirements of the board rule, which are criteria that auditors look at, and we want to make sure that there is appropriate authorization from the appropriate level so that that doesn't reflect on staff just making decisions without approval.
As I'm reading board members up to number 3, it just seems very similar as well. Once again, the LEA, the teacher themselves did it properly. The LEA just got confused. They didn't have to include a check, and they forgot to include the list. So I think both 2 and 3, it seems clear it wasn't the teacher's fault. To not make this exception would punish the individual teachers, which Board Member Reeve so eloquently described already have troubles enough without us giving them more. So it seems reasonable, unless anyone wants further information or details, I'm ready to try for a motion to approve 2 and 3.
I made that motion. We're all
Oh,
not
you
going
already
to
did?
Czech City.
Oh, sorry.
We all have plenty of money in our bank accounts. It's just that when we work for something, we should be receiving that money. So,
Right.
I'm not, losing my mortgage over my compensation. I just worked for it, so I should get it. So, I don't have to go to Czech City. I have a very financially sound life, and, but I just don't think it should be, on my back when we do these things. So, I make a motion to, support these actionable items, number 2 and number 3, to give money to the LEAs.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous, thank you.
Can I-
Anything more, Natalie?
Can I just make one clarification for Cami, since apparently I can't add late at night? So it's not 260, it's 360. There is a finger row, but the dollar amount is correct. So that, action item 2 and 3 encompasses 360 educators and $1.3 million. And then just for your information, the last group, there were 155, right? 150, number 4, there are 155 educators who did not complete all the steps of their background check, or hadn't cleared off UPAC flags, or hadn't started their background check until too late to be part of this process. And so we as staff felt that their exclusion was appropriate. And so we feel comfortable with the confines of the board rule, which means we don't fund the LEAs for those teachers because they weren't in the whole, because they hadn't done what they were supposed to do by the statutory deadline, the educators hadn't. So that's really all for this item.
Okay, I think that's all for 1.4. Board members, I'll look to you. I think we should either take a 10-minute break now or go for the end. Deputy Jones?
So do you need full number 4? Okay.
But we did
then
have
the-
something.
The other part to this too is coming out of this, just to make sure that Cami captures this, because you'll probably do the readbacks or the back brief to the board in
Yeah.
January, is that we will wait to take action on these until after the board approves the motions that have been made here today. And so we need to make sure that the LEAs understand that we can't move on this until after the board approves it in January. Everybody's okay with that? Okay? Just wanna
I don't
make
know if
sure.
it matters if we're okay with it, doesn't it?
Well, it doesn't matter, right? But- Well, I like to feel like, you
Okay.
know, these things,
All right.
I'm just, warm and cozy here, so.
Okay.
Is
Kathleen?
there a way that we can pay the teachers and then just reimburse the LEAs? No.
When the LEAs choose to fund the teachers, it's not our decision.
Yeah, it's up to them.
This is all solely on when we pay the LEAs and when people call to find out if they have to pay educators who weren't on the list, if our answer is yes or no. So our answer now would be, we've adjusted the list, so they're on the list, so yes, pay them. The one other thing I wanted to bring up is there actually is other items on this agenda, but they could wait until after a break if you wanted to do so. Or there's
Oh, I
other
mean-
items and other pieces of information on this agenda item.
On 1.4?
Yes.
No, let's definitely finish 1.3.
No, 1.3.
Oh, excuse me,
jumped
we are,
back.
we're on 1.3, you're right, we went back. Okay, so, the fund does not end on 1.3.
Well, let's keep going.
Let's keep, we're definitely gonna finish 1.3 before a break.
We just wanted to provide you an update on the estimate for student growth and local replacement for fiscal year 19's budget. The local replacement calculation, things that we didn't have ready and prepared for last board meeting, Local replacement for fiscal year 18 is $2,180 per charter school student. For fiscal year 19, it will be $2,237, which is a growth of $57 for that program per charter school student. Also, we had some anomalies come with the voted and board program after we reported on it last month. We had 3 districts that reported to us that their November election approved by their constituents to increase their voted or to establish a voted local levy for them. And so those 3 districts are Paiute, Wayne, and Tooele. All of them had increased their voted, or Wayne actually established a voted levy for so it will take effect for tax year 18, which will affect fiscal year 19's amount. So that increased the voted program about $5.5 million in state funding. So that was something that we needed to add to the estimate for the budget. And then the ESA adjustment, which we've already talked on. So those are the 3 changes that happened between October and November.
Said
They've all
some-
been accepted by
something.
the governors.
And I hope that the media picks up on it, or the general at large. We're going to be discussing intensely the Our Schools Now initiative over this next year, and that's great. I think it's a great discussion to have, whether we should be funding more at the state level. But, you know, a school district like Tooele that I'm familiar with, they are starved for funds. They are, given the taxation system, they probably have the worst hand dealt to them possibly in the state of Utah. And they are taking their own initiative and raising their own taxes to better fund their education. In my own district, Alpine School District, we could raise property taxes and have more funding for our teachers, you know, also. We have chosen not to. We're looking to the state to do it. That's okay to look to the state, but I hope districts and LEAs will think about raising taxes at their local level if they feel they're not adequately funded. Have the courage to go out and face the voters and not just look to the state or federal government to solve their problems. That's great. 12 people looked at it, they decided they wanted more, they did it. Good.
And so, tell me those 3 districts again.
Paiute, Wayne, and Tooele.
Okay, and isn't Paiute this, like, our smallest district?
They are one of the smallest.
One of the very smallest, and so they were able to get their people to vote.
So they actually, what they did is they lowered their board levy. Tell me if I give you too much information. The board levy only allows state guarantee funds up to 4 increments. They were levying at 16 increments. So they reduced their board down to 4 increments and increased their voted up to 16. So they maximized the amount of state guaranteed funds from both programs.
So their voters actually didn't have to go and vote.
So they did,
They
because
did.
it's increasing their voted rate. However, the effect to the taxpayer is pretty neutral, because it just reduces one and increases the other, so.
Okay. And what was the situation in Wayne? Because they're another real small district.
Wayne did not have a voted rate, so their voters did vote to have one. So they're up to about 13 increments from 0. So that's a huge tax increase tax benefit for them, for state guaranteed funds.
Thank you.
This is interesting. Keep it coming.
Okay, thank you.
So I think that concludes this particular agenda item. I'm subject to any other questions or concerns.
Okay. Board members, would you like a 10-minute break, or would you like to keep going? I'm sensing keep going.
Yeah.
All right. Let's hit 1.5.
Sir, 1.5 section budget reviews, so if we could invite Darren Nielsen, is Darren here? Yeah, here he is.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want anybody else with you, Darren, or? No, just you? Okay, understood. So this is a progression from previous finance committee meetings where sections come to provide, we typically do 2 sections per month. We had shifted the assessment and accountability section to this month because Darren was recently hired and wanted a little bit more time to become familiar with this budget and all that too. The process we take on this particular agenda item is to also provide briefings, if you will, or PowerPoint that we don't go through here during this meeting, but they are provided to you in the backups to orient you to the section. What we do focus on in this case, now the assessment did come already with their monthly budget report, so we're not doing that. So what we want to focus on today, subject to the chair's direction and the finance committee members' approval, is their carry forward spend plan. So as I testified yesterday in front of the board, the governor this week released the carry forward plan, so these would get loaded into their budget upon your approval. So we'll start, well, upon the board's approval, I should say. Let's see if I can do this up here. Up here it comes. Now, within their carry forward spend plan, oh boy, so, okay. I'm gonna open it 5 times here. Okay, so within their particular plan here, there's these particular programs. So college and career ready assessment. So Darren, so we've provided, you've seen these before, you've seen these from the other sections and all that, but we want to just take some time here with you with assessment. It's one of our bigger sections too. So we've placed this in here for your review. These are the instructional pieces up here, but then it goes down into here with the plan details. So for these particular carry forward amounts here for them, and then Natalie can, you know, go into the amounts and of what we're asking you to approve them, and then within the detail, that's what they intend to use them for. So Darren can speak to that if you have any questions or concerns about what they're asking you in these particular programs within the assessment budget.
Scott, do you want to tab back to the first
Okay.
one, administrative one?
Okay. Oh, sorry, I missed that one. Okay, so that's the first one, administration.
Can you tell me what this is called on our board docs list? Because I'm opening all of them and I'm having.
0706.
Thank you.
Yes.
2017.
Yeah. So 0706 is our designated, is a designation for their unit, for assessment, part where the funding's placed.
It's like opening boxes on Christmas. Oh, that's not it. huh?
Yeah. While you're looking at this, the day before I started here, at the end of October, there was a conference call that I was still in my previous employer and I was asked to participate in. It was at that meeting that I realized that 1 week later, the assessment department was scheduled to present carry forward budget proposals and to give a detailed report on their budget. And I was telling Scott the other day, whenever you get a new assignment, or sometimes we get a disproportionate amount of anxiety related to things, and later we're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. The thought of having to talk about what I thought was the best way to spend money a week after I started was one of those that caused a lot of. So the information you're going to read here, it comes through a collaborative approach working with Natalie. We're trying to identify what the overall agency's needs are financially. And you'll see, especially on this first one, that some of those requests are not related to assessment. Again, because it was the approach to completing this carry forward plan was obviously needed to be collaborative on my part, as I'm still trying to get a better picture of assessment's needs, and realizing that the operations office can see the full picture, and that's why you'll see some things in there that aren't related directly to assessment.
One other thing that I would add in this assessment admin budget, the carryover that you're considering, as always, is one-time funds. These one-time funds were largely generated because of vacancy savings within the assessment budget. With the moving of one of the staff to be the CPO officer earlier in the year, the director retiring, and then I think you had 3 or 4 vacancies or more throughout the year. This is probably a little higher than we're usually used to seeing, related to the vacancy part of the assessment admin part. Largely, this budget funds just the personnel, if I remember correctly. So we tried to ensure as we presented spend plans that the items in here were one-time items, were not things that created ongoing obligations for the board.
Kathleen?
So this is our last year with this company, and then we're moving to a different company after year 2018. for the adaptive test license fees.
Oh, on HB 15.
For here? Oh. Oh. Okay.
That one has the most details, so I thought maybe that'd
Okay.
be the best place to start. I think most of the questions will probably come here.
Okay.
Brittany?
So, item number 3 in the top area where it talks about, turnover. And then it's referenced as bonuses in the next section, or is that separate? There's 3 and 4. Assessment and accountability section is experience significant turnover.
So there's 2 4s in the document, apologize for that. But, yeah, so 3 was the turnover, and there was individuals that covered, right? You know, until we got the hiring practice done. So, yeah, 4 is asking for.
Yeah, there were three,
Oh.
that $14,000 in bonuses, there were 3 individuals in the assessment and accountability department that took on and willingly provided work much well beyond the scope of their responsibilities. So as I came in and Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman, who had worked with that section, recommended that. I certainly support that. One-time payment for them.
So you're looking at using a combination $79,000 in professional development and then some specific bonuses to address turnover in the section, is that?
Well, the bonuses aren't to address turnover, it's to compensate for work that's already been done outside the scope of their responsibilities for the 3 individuals. The $79,000 for professional learning, that's a ceiling. I don't have a quote. I haven't worked with West Ed personally, but our agency has been working with West Ed to provide professional learning. In the past, we would send a large number of our employees to what I refer to as SCAS. I can't tell you what that acronym stands for. But professional learning experiences across the country where they would join up with other states. And it's my understanding that the cost of that, the high cost of that was questioned or brought into consideration about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and there were reductions made in that, specifically in the assessment and accountability section. I think we're down to just 3 of our staff members attend their respective SCAS groups. That allows them to collaborate with leaders from other states that perform the same function. So that ceiling of $79,000, which might not get spent there, is just my request to have some funds made available as I work with West Ed to get professional development, where we bring them here and we do professional development as a group rather than sending staff members out, which that already has changed. But I'd like to provide some support. It's an agency, as I came in, kind of joked already about this, but it didn't take long for me to discover none of the staff members had been given any responsibilities with budgeting. So that first assignment became more anxiety producing as I realized, wow, who am I going to talk to for help? So one of my goals in that assessment section is to put in place some structures that allow us, when we have transition or turnover, that it's not as disruptive, that we have a process in place that allows people to come in and take a position without just a cold start, without a transition support of some kind.
Anything further?
Should we go to the next tab, or do you want, is the recommendation of the staff to make motions on each one of the plans?
I'm open to either way if you want to do it all together.
So,
unless there's one that we want to not, that the board doesn't want to recommend approving.
As I was reading this, I just have a question that probably doesn't relate to the financing, but they're talking about using these funds to support the work of Mark Peterson and Emily Wheeler in developing and deploying a communication strategy that will assist with the rebranding of the statewide assessment system. So I'm assuming that by that we mean SAGE, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The rebranding of SAGE.
Yeah, so we've changed vendors from AIR to Questar, which you guys are fully aware of for our 3rd
Yeah.
through 8th grade assessment system.
Well, I remember reading it in some board minutes when I wasn't on the board, that SAGE was developed by Utah teachers, and that the state has been earning money off selling the items in SAGE to other states. How does this deviation from utilizing SAGE anymore affect that? And when we replace something, will it be by Utah teachers, or will it be?
Yeah, that's a
something
good
else?
question, and assessment directors have been asking that question as I've come in, because I know the vendors changed, and so the question is, and some teachers believe that there's a whole new assessment system, and over the 21 years I've been in the state, working in schools, one of the frustrations we've experienced is the change then interferes with our ability to have longitudinal data, to look at our programs, and it's frustrating, especially in math, secondary math, change standards, change systems. So you get 1 or 2 years of data, and then all of a sudden you got a new set that's not comparable, right?
And your data is.
So we'll be using the same item banks that we used with AIR. The reference here to SAGE is, as you know, SAGE, that acronym has some political baggage with it. Right. It doesn't reference the actual test items, which we're very proud of, and I think they're as good of as high a quality of test items as I've ever seen in Utah, especially compared to the old CRT tests.
Yeah.
I mean, now we're measuring rigor. Adaptability is functional. There's more honesty on the outcomes of those items in relationship to college and career readiness than we ever had before. So there's a lot of things about it, and that's why states like to buy our items.
Yeah, states like to buy our items. I don't want us to lose that. But so you're essentially telling me that we will retain some of our expert excellence items and
All of them.
still be able to earn money off them that our teachers have earned for us, and then but we'll just have a new name.
Yeah, so
correct?
the naming is part of it. I believe that we need to rename our statewide assessment system. And I think that's, there's lots of people that support that opinion. I don't know how the board feels about that, as I haven't had any discussions, but, so then the challenge we have is communicating, what does it mean to have a new statewide assessment system? And we'd like to specifically target communications to our teachers, the value of the assessment system, how it stays, the parts of it that add value to their classroom, the benchmark, the interim assessments that come with it. The district I came from, those were highly valued, more so than the summative assessment from a teacher's perspective. And so that's our primary focus, but we obviously have other stakeholders, all the way through to politicians and policymakers, that we need to be really clear. So this money would be used, if you approve it, would be used to, working with Mark and Emily, to hire outside professionals that can help us with developing a good communication strategy and deploying those.
Oh, good, thanks.
Chair,
Yeah.
just want to clarify, we are not certain that the continuation will occur of, charging for item test bank material. I mean, that was part of the AIR that developed after we entered into the AIR contract. Not saying that we couldn't potentially do that in the future, however, that's really not clear at this point.
Kathleen?
So when we started using SAGE, our school district used SAGE interims and SAGE summatives. And we used the SAGE platform to create formative assessments, and we also used the SAGE platform to create SAGE summative, to use the SAGE summative information. One of the problems we ran into, or challenges we ran into, I should say, was that because it was used the same platform, parents could opt out of all SAGE experiences. My concern with this is that if we are using the same platform for our summative and our formative, we will now have people opting out of the formative as well. And formative is a productivity tool so that you can inform your instruction in a more robust manner. So my concern is that to use a summative assessment as a formative tool creates a layer of opting out that would be detrimental to informed instruction, and then every LEA would have to purchase a separate formative assessment, is what the district I work in is doing currently. So as we look to move forward with our new contract, I don't know if it's in our best interest to have that, be that robust as a formative assessment for our districts, because then it creates the same problem we ran into the last time.
And with the opting out, it's the 3 through 8 RFP is already closed, and we're completing the statement of work. But within that, when that was completed this last summer or spring, it does include not formative, but it includes the benchmarks, the interims, and testlets, the smaller testlets, which are similar to what we've been getting through the AIR engine.
Mm-hmm.
So that process, we're down the road on that in
Yeah.
terms of using the same engine, but you're right. The other tool that we support at the state level is UTIPS, Test Items Pool. It's a formative mechanism, and the Assessment Accountability Office still supports that. The problem with it is the items then, it's not as predictive because the items are teacher created. They're not aligned items that we've gone through the item analysis like we do with our statewide assessment system.
Mm-hmm.
Where we take retired items and move them into the interims and the benchmarks.
Maybe we could have this conversation another time, because I don't think UTIPS is as robust as.
I agree.
And it does not, it's not supported really anymore. Teachers don't have access to it as much as they used to. And I loved UTIPS, I used it every day, and I can no longer use it. And so,
Oh, really?
yeah.
We do still have an employee on my organizational chart that is UTIPS. I had a scheduled conference call with him. He doesn't live in our state. We contract with him out of Florida is where I had to try to reach him, because I'm trying to get an understanding of what our goals still are with UTIPS and how that functions. But
Maybe we can have that conversation then.
okay.
Thank you.
Anything further?
Should we go to the college and career readiness? These are restricted funds, if I understand correctly, Natalie. And we're recommending you reserve those just to pay for ACT in the future, especially because growth is often not calculated in our funding mechanism.
Brittany?
Yeah, sorry, I had a question. Just maybe it's in the next section. So this one talks about participation number and growth isn't calculated. It says that, but it talks about the cost of the writing assessment added increases it to $51 per student. I was under the understanding that we asked for the appropriation to include the writing. Is that for the next following year? Why are we using carryover funds?
So technically, we probably shouldn't even have put this on the consideration list, because this is a specific appropriation for a specific purpose.
Okay.
And any unexpended money just rolls forward into that purpose in the future. It ended up on here because we were having conversations about budget and where everything lined up, and we've been having a lot of conversations about the RFPs, and we just didn't take it off. But it's a good question. So you're correct. Last year when we went through all of the budget line items for assessment, and writing was added to the ACT for 11th grade, right? We're in 11th grade. We did ask for an increased appropriation related to student growth and related to the increase of the cost of the test. That appropriation was funded, I believe it was about $560,000. What we're trying to communicate here is that moving forward, while we did get the increased cost of the test for this year funded, this appropriation doesn't grow from year to year based on student growth. And so we have a contract in place that fixes the price, but we do see increased student growth on an annual basis. And in the past, growth hadn't been funded either. And so these dollars will be reserved to fund growth and only be dedicated specifically to ACT 11. But when it runs out, we're going to go and have to ask for additional money related to student growth with the ACT. We think we're fine for a while. We don't think we'll be able to utilize these carryover funds, but largely a lot of the carryover was generated. The reason that it was on here for conversation, is the carryover was generated out of the 17 appropriation, which is, you can tell here by the program code starting with fiscal year 17. This is because we didn't get writing off the ground when we thought we would. And so we have kind of a one-time cost savings that rolls over as well. And so there really is no action required of the board in this respect. It's a restricted appropriation, but it is lumped in with the assessment budget. And so we wanted to make sure, especially since there's lots of conversation around licensing fees and the large amounts of carryover that usually have lived in assessment, we wanted to make sure to address those with you in case you had any questions.
I have some information that would be interesting to me as a board member. So we started the ACT, participating in ACT, back in 2012, 2013. And I know one of the things that was hoped with ACT is that now it would be given to all students, and all students would then have that ACT test score that they could utilize to get into college. And the hope was that many students who might otherwise not apply to college or get into college would do so because they had that free ACT score that was paid for by the state. Do we have any numbers that would show us whether college entry of Utah students utilizing that ACT score?
Whether the
So we
number
could
of high
s-
school
yeah, so we could
graduating
see-
seniors have increased that attend a four-year, two or
Yeah.
four-year university.
If having that ACT actually helped our students getting into college or more applying for college and such.
Yeah, I have not seen that kind of data.
I don't know, we need to associate with higher ed to get that kind of data.
It's challenging to get because once they leave our system, it's hard to track and connect them back with us because we use a student ID, SSID, student identifier number, which allows us to know, follow them a little bit. But once they leave us, they no longer use that number. So now, especially if they leave state and go to a college somewhere out of state, it's really hard to track that.
So we don't have, I thought at one point in time we had a system where their student ID for K-12 would be different, but if they went on in our state to higher education, that their ID would link back to it, or they'd be able to know what those students did.
I think that was part of the UDA, the Data Alliance part, but I can check, I can make sure that, we're tracking on the same thing. I had to step out, so I might not have heard the whole conversation.
Yeah, well, so what I was asking is since Utah's been providing the ACT for every student in the state, has providing that made a difference in the number of kids going on to higher education?
Okay, I can check on it.
That's an information
And
request.
I think it was part of the UDA part, so, but I'll check. So it was part of the information request.
Okay, thank you.
Grab that, Ken.
Anecdotally, I'm the father of 5 children. My youngest is a 6th grader. My oldest is a junior at Utah State right now. And my oldest, who started a rock band when he was 14, a garage band that I thought would go away quickly, did not. And his peer group, none of them were interested in higher education. And so we were worried about that. And the only reason he took the ACT is because he was required to. He didn't fill out the survey ahead of time. He didn't do anything that wasn't required. And so I was grateful as a parent because I couldn't get him to go take it on a Saturday. And he's going to be graduating from Utah State in 1 year. So anecdotally, I'm personally very grateful for the ACT. Yeah, and I've seen that impact my family.
Well, and I think that's one of the things the state board was hoping is that by implementing the ACT, we'd be offering or handing kids this test score that they didn't have to do anything extra or pay extra for that could get them into higher education. So just to follow up on that.
Janet, you inspired me though to ask something else. Do we know, can parents opt out of taking the ACT?
Yes.
And how does the opt out of the ACT compare to opt out of SAGE?
In terms of the percent of opt-outs?
Yeah.
I don't have any numbers on that based on my recent experience as a curriculum director and prior to that assessment director. I would say it's probably less. You still have a percentage of kids who if you were to ask them in school, they're gonna say, I'm not going to college, and they'll still view that ACT as a non-essential. So you still have both the kind who opt out by just not participating to their best, and those who go through a more formal process. But I would suspect that the overall declared number of opt-outs is lower, but I don't know that.
So, if I understand correctly, up until recently, it wasn't required. It was offered for every student in Utah, but it wasn't a required test, is that correct?
I don't know. My impression in the school level, once the state started paying for it, that it was a required assessment.
Because we talked about, about a year and a half ago, the standards assessment, we were talking about, do we estimate the funding based on who could take the test or who does take the test? Because I think it wasn't like, you didn't officially have to opt out of it, but there was just a lot of people who didn't choose to take the test. And so but when it became part of, anyways, just a question, but it seems like there's been a transition of recently where it may not have been.
It's part of our
like-
accountability system
Yeah, it's
now.
required.
We axed the SAGE for like 9th or 10th graders, and we replaced it with
11.
these.
It was 11.
11.
Yeah, we replaced it. So I think it's mandatory now.
What I could easily, well, not easily, I could probably get for you would be the number of ACTs administered last year, and compare that to the number of 11th graders that we have
Yeah.
enrolled, and then we could see what number of students didn't take the ACT.
Yeah, and how that compares to
If we
how
could-
other grades, opt out by percentage. Like your example, well, your example is different, but many students are very motivated on the ACT. They talk to their friends and brothers and sisters, and they know ACT matters.
Our first year that we offered it, where you funded it, we actually had, at Bear River High School, we had a student try to get in if it wasn't eligible. It wasn't the right grade.
Oh my goodness.
Overachiever.
Yeah.
Good problem to have in some ways.
Should we move on to the next tab, sir? Or any
Yes.
other questions on the college and career readiness assessment? HB 15, or no, I'm sorry, HB.
Yeah, the
HB
adaptive
15, yeah.
test.
So largely, these are just the licensing fees that come in from the sale of the test questions, and they're all restricted for the payment of our final obligations for our AIR contract. So again, nothing really to discuss, it's just more information for the board.
And those are the last two tabs, 15 and licensing fees tab.
Kathleen.
So that goes back to the question I was asking before. So this is our last year with our SAGE contract. Our AR contract.
We did do an extension to continue through this year.
Yeah.
And so paying off the original contract and then funding the extension, which is the last tab.
Uh-huh.
Yes, that will complete our obligations while we also enter into obligations with the new vendors.
So with our new vendors, do we see and this might be a question for another time, but I'm wondering, do we see a decrease in our obligations because we own all the test content and all the items?
Entirely because of that.
Yeah, there are, we were just looking at this last night, and we're finishing up the statement of work and contract. We have Questar on our campus here on Wednesday of next week for almost a full-day meeting, and then we have a handoff meeting between Questar and AIR in January where both teams will be here. But it looks like our contract with Questar for 3.8 will be a cost savings. Again, we won't know until we finalize that. There's a few things we're working on, but it does look like it'll be less. And the amount of time that we have to put into item development is reduced over what we had to the original, with the original contract with AIR, because we didn't have any of our own items to start with. So, and that does have a cost. We will have item development built in because, as you know, we have to we graduate items and create new items each year just to keep your test live. And that's still built into our contract. But I expect when you see the contract for Questar 3.8, you'll see a cost savings over this.
Thank you.
And this is just another information question. So I'm looking at the licensing fees, and we request licensing fees be reserved to pay for the remaining costs associated with the extension of the air contract. What's the air contract?
That's what you were referring to as SAGE. So the AIR is the American Institute of Research. They were the vendor that helped us develop our test items and purchase some from other places and then deliver the assessment.
Another unknown acronym.
Yeah.
And then it's talking here about the costs associated with amendment number 7 to remove writing from 9th and 10th grade ELA assessment. That was legislated, wasn't it? Removing of the writing. That was that a decision of this board, or that was?
I'm not aware of any legislation.
It wasn't a legislative change, it was our change. I don't agree with that change. Okay, thank you.
Anything further, board?
Do we need an action on this?
Yes.
We do?
Can you tell me the action items too?
Brittany apparently understands it. Let Brittany make a motion.
I move that we approve the spend plan, the carry forward spend plan for the assessment section, assessment.
That's what you're looking for, I have. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, passes unanimously.
Do you
That's
have
all
it?
in 1-5?
Do you have any other questions for assessment accountability? Not that I know a lot of answers yet, but I can certainly find out anything you need to know. On the PowerPoint, I would just, no, we're not presenting, but the very last slide, I've kind of detailed the assessment accountability's staffing. You'll see that there's some unfilled positions. We've got one that's open right now. That's been one of the issues I've tried to tackle. This first part being there is understanding what our needs are. There certainly are needs there, and trying to figure out as we hire personnel that we get them put into the right responsibilities. So
Maybe, I have one thing. Whenever we're presenting data broken down by ethnicity or income, if we could always break it down by gender as well, especially on test scores, I'd appreciate that. It came to my attention, the Salt Lake Tribune apparently was leaked, and I read it. It was quite interesting. BYU Provo now gives essentially a girl has to get one ACT point higher than a boy for equal consideration of BYU Provo. And apparently that's now becoming the norm across the country. Some people would say it's just boys are not as smart, boys are getting decimated by porn and video games, or more susceptible to drugs. I don't know, but the test scores show that men are not doing as well as women right now and not moving on to college. So I don't know how to change that, but I think that's an alarming trend that does not bode well for the future. So I think it needs to be highlighted as much. Kathleen?
I've used Data Gateway and some of our tools, and it is broken down by every ethnicity and male and female, and I think that information is already available.
it's available on the Data Gateway, and I don't know how other LEAs use it, but in Box Elder we did look at that, and there are some big gaps, there's
Yep.
some gender gaps depending on the content area. It's not across the board that women outperform men, or young women and young men, but where there are gaps, whether the men have higher or the women have higher, there's some that are pretty significant.
I've heard that women are more in the medium, well, boys seem to bifurcate more, either good path or jail more so. Am I stereotyping, or is that what you're seeing in the data?
You're probably being a little unfair there.
Good. Good.
Well, I think it also, there's lots of different risk factors that you can add and subtract when you are looking at the Data Gateway besides just male and female. You can break it down by English language learners, social demographic, homelessness, and mobility, and then also break it down for male and female. And it's not just simply male and female, it's also each demographic has a higher rate depending on which risk factor they fit into. So I think a generalization that males and females have different success rates is compounded by different risk factors in our lives as well. So if we took out all those risk factors, you might only see an equal equation, but once you start to add those risk factors, that's when you start to see the divergence of males to females. And the prison to pipeline that you're kind of referencing, I think there's also a need for females who are not going to college and families to create a whole other set of resources in the next generation.
Yeah, amen. Brittany?
I have one question on the last slide. It's, you have 3 sections funded by, and then there's one education specialist that says it's funded by NAEP.
Yeah.
What is that position? Where does that
That's, I don't know where it started from. It's funded, though, through a federal source, is that correct? That's directly responsible for the administration and oversight of the NAEP test, which we administer in 2 grades in our state, so. Brittany and the captain?
Is that an ongoing grant, and so is that a permanent position that's been going on for years in the past?
It's actually funded through the National Center for Education Statistics, right? And those grants don't have end dates, if I remember correctly, right? I think so. We reapply every year, but it's been continuing.
It's non-competitive
So, yeah,
as well.
it sort of appears, and I think that position also supports the data that's collected and the submissions that are made to NCES. And NCES is the body that generates the formula calculations that distribute federal formula dollars. So I think there's kind of a link between the data and the assessment, the financial data and the assessment data. The financial operations section also, we receive a travel grant every year. We're required to attend mandatory training on how to report statistics and the finances. And so they fund the specific people who have specific responsibilities to attend that training. They just pay for the travel.
I've administered the NAEP, and NAEP people are outside of the district. So when you look at all these other tests, most of those tests are administered by people in the district. But when you do a NAEP test, it's from someone that's outside the district. They come in with all their own equipment, and they come in with very specific rules and regulations. And because it's standardized at a federal level, you can cross-reference it state to state a little bit more successfully than from air to something that's getting in there. So as a person who's administered, I can tell you that dealing with the person that comes in is quite exciting. Very intensive.
Yeah, you'll see reports in the national news about NAEP scores and how our students are doing.
Okay. Anything further?
Well, for the assessment part, we have one other section, child nutrition program chair.
Okay.
So if the chair would invite Kathleen Britton, the director for the child nutrition program, up, so she can speak to her budget report. Again, in this particular case, with this section, she has provided a handout and then also her briefing. Again, we don't go through those. Those are provided for you to look at prior to the meeting. But just as you did with the assessment section, you're welcome to ask questions about those particular products. So Lexi joins us as well. She's currently helping child nutrition program from the accounting standpoint too, so she's available to answer any questions on the board summary section report that's provided on the screens and in your backup. If Kathleen, you want to introduce yourself and talk to them a little bit about you.
Kathleen Britton, Director of the Child Nutrition Programs. And as you can see with the information that I shared with you, I gave you a handout that's kind of in there. That's just a summary of the whole PowerPoint with numbers. And then for your information, I do have our strategic plan for our child nutrition program and how it relates with the board's objectives. And so I do have one of these and have more if you would like those. Do you have any questions on any information that was in the PowerPoint?
I believe there's about 110 charter schools.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, there are 41 districts or so. Is there any district that is not in part of the child nutrition program?
No.
So we have 69 charter schools that are participating out of, I guess, 110. My criticism of charter schools, as you're probably aware, is that charter schools are for rich kids, because charter schools don't offer school buses, and they don't offer free and reduced school lunch. It's a stereotype, and it's partially true. It appears that maybe 2/3 of charter schools are offering free and reduced school lunch.
Correct.
All right. Why do you think the others are not? I know it's their right to do so, but it seems
Well, one,
poor policy.
when they build their buildings, they don't put the infrastructure in for kitchens, and so they don't have the facilities to offer the program. We encourage them to put that in. We've met with several charter schools that have thought about that. We encourage them to work with school districts to help them vend meals to them. We actually have about 4 new charters this year, and an average of 5 a year that come onto our program. So we have done a lot of outreach with them to help them and get on the program, but the biggest obstacle they run against is they don't have the facility for it.
Do you guys try and make it to all the charter school conferences and, give a presentation and have a booth so you can
We
interact?
do go to the board, if we meet with the charters now that they're up on the same floor as us upstairs, we talk to them quite a bit on how we can network with them and get the information out.
Kathleen?
I work in areas that have food insecurity,
Mhm.
and when I first started teaching, students in 6th grade could go back for seconds, and meals were left over. That has been stopped. Is that a policy from the state? Because there's so much food waste in our districts that it's really discerning when you have such food insecurity that we're throwing stuff away.
Mhm.
Why is that happening?
That is a site-based.
Okay.
We allow them to choose how they want to run their programs. We encourage them to have sharing tables.
Okay.
It, depending on the local health department's rules, in each county is a little bit different on sharing tables, but we encourage that. So that if a child doesn't finish something, they can put it on this table with like an ice sheet or ice,
Yeah.
and then other students can come and take that.
I've seen it with breakfast, but our lunches are, yes, there's no seconds, there's no, and it's upsetting to me because a 1st grader and a kindergartner is provided the same allotment as a 6th grader, and to think that each kid gets the same amount. Well, I'm glad to know that's site-based, and I guess I need to.
And if you talk to your district, you can, like what I've had other parents call and ask me about that, and I usually refer them to talk to their food service directors and bring that issue up to them. And a lot of times they're not aware of it.
Yeah, because it's across the district now, so I guess it's a miscommunication that maybe we need to address.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you so much for that question.
Breakfast, it's
Mhm.
been getting some publicity. I think it's growing. Is it stagnating? Is it growing rapidly? How is breakfast doing with our LEAs?
3 years ago, myself and Utah's Against Hunger and Action for Healthy Kids developed Utah breakfast expansion programs, because Utah is last in the nation for breakfast participation, to help that. So we have done a lot of outreach, and the breakfast numbers are going up statewide.
Why do you think we're last? Is it
I think it's a cultural, I do.
Okay. And, all right, the last question is, I believe Granite and Murray have outsourced their school lunch program. And as I've learned more about that, I think outside of Utah, in some states, Michigan, Arizona, you have like 25–50% of school districts outsourcing their school lunch. Why, do you have any thoughts on how that's going at Granite Murray and why we're not outsourcing more school lunches?
Those are food service management companies that
Yeah.
run their programs. There is a cost. There's a little bit of a misconception to districts until they look into it that it's taken all off their plate, but the way the regulations read, it's still the responsibility of the school district. So if a program is doing well, it's not really, that is their choice to decide if they want to outsource or not, but most of the time it's a cost, it's not benefit. It doesn't really benefit them to outsource it if their programs are financially stable right now.
Mhm. Do you see, can you make any subjective comments on what's better or worse, Granite or Murray?
I can't make a comment. I mean, everybody does a wonderful job in our state, whether they're food service management or on-site.
All right. So I have one more question. In other states, there's been an effort to, not so much as punish, because right now we just have a, just pass, just meet the requirements, just pass, just meet the requirements. In other states, there's more like rewarding school districts or LEAs that have positive food policies. Like some districts do not allow beverages with caffeine to be sold to youth. I mean, I know it sounds radical in Utah. Other states it sounds nuts that we sell beverages with caffeine to young children in their schools. I mean, is there any interest anywhere in creating a policy that, maybe grades schools on their health and food, nutrition environment? And not even that we reward them, just so that they're aware of, other school districts. I mean, if you get a D, you might say, why are you giving us a D? Oh, because we're selling added sugar and caffeine in copious amounts.
Well,
to
all
teenagers.
districts have to have a local wellness policy,
Mhm.
and it's according to the USDA, to participate in our program.
Mhm.
The regulations have changed to tighten up the wellness policies, and there's certain things that they have in it. So we've been working with the health department to work with the school districts to write a very clear, healthy wellness policy for the students and the teachers. And we've seen a big change in what they'll offer. Food for rewards, they have taken that, they write that in there, that not allow that. More activity, more wellness. A lot of the districts are going away from, especially with the smart snacks, the unhealthy items, because that's part of the regulations too. So I think we've seen a big change from the state agency. In our department, we are pushing smarter lunchrooms, which is a behavioral based on how to set up service lines to get children to take healthier items first before they choose others. We sent staff there last year, and so we've been encouraging districts every time we go out to do a review to look at their menus. If your participation is struggling, look and see what you're presenting to the students and how you're presenting it, and encouraging them to look at what they can change within their programs.
So do we have any school districts, major ones, that have stopped the sale of beverages with caffeine and added sugar? Or
Well, they
are all still
cannot serve beverages they can only serve diet products right now if they're serving them in their vending machines and they're participating in the program.
Okay. So we've ended the sale of beverages with added caffeine and added sugar, essentially from vending machines?
Caffeine but sugar part is, it has to meet 200 calories, or most beverages, they can't have sugar in them. They can have like a juice, but it can only be like 6 ounces.
But so caffeine is still sold or not?
It depends on the districts.
Still depends on the district, so they can. Some of them are still selling caffeine to teenagers. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Anyone else?
Just for the budget piece for CNP.
Wait, we're supposed to be talking money here?
Yeah.
Well, so, I'm still working on my delivery here. In the report, just for clarity, where you see the FY 2017 column, that's their prior year expenditures by these sources of funding. What you will see is in the column that's board approved budget. So that was at the beginning of the year, and now with carry forward and all that, you're going to see a significant increase in this budget, I would say, with all the dollars that are associated with that. So just as a heads up there, if you look at the finance report, for this section for this month, and then next month you go, oh my gosh, that's what happened, okay? Because it's just part of the process. It's not typically this late, in the game, so to speak, but again, because we're bound by whether the governor releases the carry forward or not like that, it seemed to come a little bit later this year, so too, so.
Well, and also it's standard to have 17 and 18 grants operating at the same time. The
Right.
state year and the federal fiscal year overlap, and so we're
Mhm.
finishing up our 17 grants and then moving on to the 18. So that's not an anomaly or anything strange.
There's the, if there's any particular questions, you know, we really try to do with all the sections a good job of just demonstrating to you the multiple programs that are within the sections. Whether it's assessment or CMP, special education, all that too. You have all these multiple programs, and then you see the expenditures related to the prior year, which was 2017, and then what you approved in the budget for 18. So you'll have expenditures that still occur, you know, you can't just stop operations, right? But those take place. So if there's any particular questions or concerns about any of the programs on the left, what the approved budget or base budget was for 18, and then just please note that, you know, you'll see changes in those amounts.
Kathleen?
Oh, I was gonna say, I'd like to make a motion to approve the carry forward funds.
Well,
We don't
no,
have
we
any
don't have that
state,
because they're the
it's all
federal
federal
part. Yeah, they're
funds.
federal.
Great, then I
So,
don't
yeah.
make a motion.
Because
Sorry.
those are restricted. Whenever we bring you the carry forward, would all be the state funds and all that too, because federal's restricted to that particular program. So we always just keep it there.
Thank you.
So I just had a question to ask. I know I was talking to board member Gravitt yesterday, and she eats school lunch every day. And she was saying, yay, Michelle Obama, because now she gets a fruit and a vegetable.
Mhm.
And they used to have pizza like every day. So I'm just wondering, those federal guidelines for fruits and vegetables, how did they affect the cost? Did people have to reallocate? Because I know fruits and vegetables are expensive. Did money increase in the program, or how was that handled?
Okay, the federal government did increase the meal reimbursement by 6 cents.
6 cents?
6 cents, but our state is very fortunate because the schools get the liquor tax money. So that has really helped the school districts with their food costs compared to other states.
Okay, so you're saying to fund our child nutrition programs, we don't use solely federal monies. We get a subsidy from the states from the liquor tax.
Yes, they get 10% of the liquor tax sales, and it's distributed according to the meals that they serve. So for
Okay,
every
but
meal you
it's
serve,
earmarked
for just school lunch.
For just school lunch, okay.
Just refer to the panel, ma'am, $42 million of state liquor tax was spent last year.
There it is.
So that's a really big help to the school districts to allow them to provide.
And do you know how well the kids have received the fruits and vegetables? Do you have any sense if they're throwing them all away, or if that's making a difference in terms of their nutrition and the obesity?
I don't have any data on that. The health department runs a lot of data for that, and I will share that with us. From my going out and viewing the schools on reviews and stuff, the younger kids are doing much better, and as they're moving through the system, they are doing better in eating. It's just, it was very difficult when this came about to have a 10th grader that never was told that they had to eat it, all of a sudden has to eat it. So the kids that have been in the system for the last 5 years that didn't know any different are receiving and responding better to taking the fruits and vegetables and eating them. And the school districts and charters are doing a really good job at presenting them differently to encourage them to eat it.
Thank you.
Can you explain the difference between the regular school lunch program and then, speaking of fruits and vegetables, there's a separate program that has lower participation for fresh fruit and vegetable, and so what is that program?
That is a separate grant
Uh-huh.
that comes through the Farm Bill, and schools have to apply for it every year, and you have to be a low-income school. You have to have 50% or more on participating, and they submit an application, and then we grade the applications and provide it. It's a dollar amount per child, and it's a fresh fruit or vegetable outside of breakfast and lunchtime.
I am a part of the Fresh Fruit program, and I'd like to say that it is really exciting to pass out various fruits and vegetables to our kids. They do a phenomenal job exposing the kids to various fruits and vegetables. I tell you, sometimes the butternut squash kind of into a pieces not go over as well as the grades. But it is exciting to see kids be exposed to different fruits and vegetables and develop a love of different foods, because kids in food insecurity areas do not have exposure to different tastes of different types of fruits and vegetables, so that is really exciting. The other part about school lunch program was how they're required to take a fruit or a vegetable. I was in schools when that changed and how they were required to then have a piece of fruit on their plate before they were allowed to move through the lunchroom. It has decreased. Kids are now taking it and eating it, but in the beginning they took it and threw it away. It was really discerning. And that's why I asked the question about the waste and how we can eliminate some of that, because we do have a really big waste problem in this state and country. So thank you for that fresh food program. It's great.
Any other questions?
One quick question. Sometimes I'm concerned, sometimes the district or LEA might see this budget, see the amount they get, and they say, boom, okay, that's the end of what we're spending on school lunch. We're not using any additional funds. They can use additional funds, right? To spend on.
Most, it depends on the LEA.
Yeah.
But most LEAs are, the National School Lunch Program is a standalone program in their district. They don't pull from the general budget.
But if the school district or LEA wants to add, make a better school lunch, they can. So I guess my concern is that some school districts that are wealthier are providing, potentially much better nutrition and meals than others. Are you seeing substantial disparities in the quality or the
I haven't
nutrition?
seen a lot of, when we look at the reports that come through finance, a lot of districts giving money to the school lunch program. The only time we see that is the way the regulations read is if they are in the hole, that the school district has to make them out of that, and they have to transfer the funds, but otherwise they do not usually transfer funds.
Okay, so that would be abnormal. So most school districts are able to fund their school district program solely on the state liquor tax and the federal money.
And they charge paid students. They charge a paid lunch price. So if you don't qualify for free or reduced, you pay. An average lunch for an elementary kid is $2.
Okay. Good. That's all I have.
Any other questions?
What about breakfast? I know kids can qualify into free breakfast. If kids want to just come there for breakfast,
They can eat just breakfast if they want, and if they qualify for free or reduced lunch, they automatically qualify for free or reduced.
What do they pay for a breakfast if they want to pay for it?
An average price for breakfast, I think, is about $1, $1.10
Okay.
around the state. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. I can, if you would like some of these, I can email them to you, or I have some more hard copies upstairs, I can run them down. Okay?
Can I just ask one more question? So with Board Member Campbell's question, so you can pay for a breakfast if you have free and reduced lunch, but we do have a breakfast in the classroom, and that school breakfast program, and that's just provided for everyone, and then it's reimbursed by who takes it, which is different than the other program?
No, breakfast in the classroom is just an alternate way of serving breakfast. So when you go through kids that want to take it in the classroom, they can, and they check them off.
Yeah.
Kids, just like when you go to the cafeteria. We've encouraged low-income schools, if they have the funds to do, or if they're a CEP school, to do a universal free breakfast.
Okay.
So that all students that are in the classroom can eat.
Okay.
And what district are you, Granite?
Granite.
Yeah, they do some breakfast in the classrooms, and I think it's all free.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's why
'cause
I was
there's-
concerned when you asked that
yeah.
question, because that's not been my experience. When they do the breakfast in the classroom program, that's definitely been a different experience than going through the breakfast.
Right.
Yeah,
And I'm
so
going to see a
clarify that
Salt Lake.
little bit for me. So are kids in a blanket fashion offered free breakfast?
Some districts, yes. If
Some
you're,
districts.
and
Some
other,
schools.
and
Some-
some schools just themselves have just decided to waive the cost of breakfast to
Okay,
encourage.
so they just absorb that somehow.
Mhm.
So all kids can have a free breakfast.
Right.
You're welcome.
So Chair, that concludes agenda item 1.5 with assessment and CNP. 1.6, we need our DHRM staff here. Natalie went to go find out where they are, so if it pleases the committee, could we take maybe a 5-minute break just to get them down here? That's the second to the last agenda item, so it shouldn't take too much time.
I think, yeah.
They might be tied up in another committee meeting, so we're trying to get them down here to be present for when we talk about 1.6.
You just have 1.6 and 1.7.
Right, yeah, and
Why
Dan,
don't-
well, actually, here's Dana right now, but
Okay.
it's up to you, so.
Who else are we waiting for?
Just Dana, so we're good.
Oh, okay.
So we can go right into 1.6. Dana, will you come up here to the table? Yeah. So Chair, this was at your request to put this agenda item on here, and what the intent is here today is to talk about the current policies that are in place. So I'll just start here with R477, the workplace harassment prevention. Staff were required to take 2 significant trainings. It's called ethics training and workplace harassment, and what's the other word? Workplace harassment prevention.
And abusive conduct.
And abusive conduct prevention training. So all of our staff are aware of where they stand by way of the leadership within the staff, where they stand as far as taking those 2 particular trainings. So we'll make sure that we're diligently tracking their adherence to that standard of taking both of the trainings. The R477 is pretty robust in, R477-15, workplace harassment prevention. There's the term sexual harassment, but what they've done is combine the work and define it as workplace, which would encompass sexual harassment, abusive conduct, all those types of things into this one policy, with legislation that again dictates that we do need to train our staff in both of those areas, ethics and workplace harassment.
And they're every other year, one?
And every other year, yeah, so it's an every other year occurrence for those 2 particular trainings. I did, at your direction, ask the DHRM staff to pull any kind of settlements that have occurred that are specifically related to sexual harassment, and my understanding is there are none
0
for that, but there are other settlements that occurred, but not specific to any kind of a sexual harassment finding or.
So we have had, it's really important for the minutes, we've had no settlements for sexual harassment for employees of the State Board of Education going back
5 years.
5 years. Okay, and so before 5 years, we either don't have data or you haven't checked.
We don't really have data on it. We couldn't find anything.
That makes me feel better in my oversight role, given the substantial surprises other people have been finding out lately. But has there been other serious patterns of misconduct, I guess?
The Board of Education has had 4, they've had 8 cases, 4 of which resulted in no payments and no findings. There was 1 payment. It was a breach of contract.
Okay.
And the other 3 were discrimination, and they did not win their cases.
I'm glad that is now publicly available to everyone. Kathleen?
This has nothing to do with money, but it's a concern that when we're talking about this with one of my fellow board members, that as a teacher, my phone number is published. And as a teacher in a school, students sometimes have malicious intent towards teachers to create a problem. And so as a teacher who many teachers try really hard to keep their phone numbers private, because with all this digital awareness, you can be susceptible if people have your phone numbers. So what policies can we put in place here for me if I got a text from a student that was sexting me? How do I protect myself from that? Because my phone number is public.
That's a good question, and I don't have the immediate answer on that one.
And how do we protect our board members with their information that's public because we're elected, but now is available to anyone who would like to harm us. Are there any protections in place for us?
Not that I'm aware of, but we can check into it and see. Being public officers and public employees, a lot of our information is not protected.
So our district, my district protects me by not allowing me not to publish my picture because it has been used in the past to harass teachers and photoshopped out to their heads and put into dating sites, which now I do not have that protection with the state because my picture has been published. So
Mine has too, so you're
yeah.
making me think.
So as we look at this, how would I report that, and how do I report it to show that I have not taken part of it? I've been harassed, or I have been a victim of somebody harassing me.
So I know right now our executive director at DHRM, because of all this sensitive stuff that's happening out there, is starting to look into things like that.
Mhm.
And I don't know exactly how this is going to fall out when.
Because these have places in policies of me being an aggressor or me being a victim.
But not.
In the workplace, but not from the outside influences.
Right.
So when I look at this, I don't see anything here that protects me from.
And I think that's probably something we need to be addressing, just because it's relatively new.
Yeah.
You know, and what's happening now.
Yeah.
So I'm taking notes, and I will.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
See what I can find out for you.
So we'll take that as a data item, Chair, if that's okay, you know, a request for more information on that and come back to the committee with it, so. But it'll probably take a couple months at least, so, if it's okay, we'll just follow up at the time when she actually has the information.
June.
That's okay for the committee.
June's my due date for all my assignments.
June?
Yes.
Okay.
Just kidding.
So by June. By June.
I like that name.
Earlier if possible.
I have a rubric, a due date.
I am glad this is so boring. You know, I really am.
Well, this is great news. I was just gonna say, as I'm looking here at each of us as board members, they, you know, our names, addresses, and phone numbers, and email addresses are all publicly.
And pictures.
And pictures are all on the website. And as I know, I've tried to contact people in Granite, and you don't have access to all of their personal information like that. I think you have to call, or maybe they have an email or something. But anyway, yeah, it would be interesting to look into that. Yeah.
So with Granite, if you try to contact somebody, they are given a phone that they use for their public persona. But for us, it becomes our personal phone numbers. So that is problematic.
Yep, I think there's a strong argument that you should not have to release your phone number unless your employer or the state is paying for it. But as an elected official, we're in a different, we have to make people happy to get elected. And I think people expect to be able to chew on us and call us with, I get random calls about absurd things at times.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're usually kind of fun, but I appreciate, I'm a man, and so I just don't get targeted, I think, like women do. So I don't know if good luck.
I'd say as a man, you're targeted more as a teacher, because that's where that's going. As men being left alone with females in the classroom. And so I can't say that there's a generalization for my specific education experiences where it's men and women that are separate.
And I think Kathleen's saying is she's in a different position as an employee of the state that has UPAC obligations, right? That you and not, well, I do, but you don't, right? And so it's that idea. So if she has, you know, inappropriate material from a student on her phone, she could lose her teaching, right? Her job is at risk, whereas you're just, you know, an elected official and it's handled totally differently.
And
So
board
it's-
member Gravitt,
Yeah, right,
Nielsen.
and so it's that idea of where her elected position intersects with her job, her paid job.
I mean, if I got an underage nude photo from anyone on my phone, I think I'd just take my phone immediately to law enforcement and give it to them and say.
But that
"I
needs
don't
to
know what
be
do."
here for us to have a set policy in place. Yeah,
That's probably
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
we'll do that, we'll work on that.
thank you.
So, just as a note of DHRM does not ever, when we cannot give out your name, your address, your phone number to anybody just because they call in and ask you.
Yeah.
Well, ask us for it, we can't, we don't.
Yeah, it's
I can get
sorry.
fired for that.
Thank you so much.
Subject to any other questions or direction from the chair or the committee, that concludes 1.6. Would you like to move to 1.7?
Yeah, 1.7.
So those are requests for data and information. Vice Chair Cummins had asked for particular information, which we've provided here today. So if we could take just a little bit of time to review that with her. And if you have any questions, ma'am, you know, from what we have, if you need more time, we can keep it in there or do all that too. Plus, we've captured some information requests, i.e. from committee member Cannon on it too, and then of course, this recent request here for that. So Jamie's just coming forward in case there's questions on the items or material that we provided as follow-up to Vice Chair Cummins' request. Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk to it, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Jamie.
As part of October or November's Finance Committee, I can't remember which one, Board Member Cummins asked us if we could run a possible scenario to fund kindergarten at 1.0 WPU rather than the 0.55 that it is currently at. And then there was further discussion about changing it to also a 0.75. So I ran both scenarios for you, and if you can pull up that K-12 WPU. Basically, if we increase the weighting of 0.75 and left all other grade bands at 1.0 weighting, it would take an additional $36.8 million to fund that. If we funded kindergarten at a 1.0 weighting, which means that all grade bands would be weighted the exact same, it would cost an additional $75.9 million.
Brittany?
Thank you very much for this, and thank you for the speed. I know you said it may take a little bit longer, so thank you very much. I was actually surprised at how low it was, you know, because my initial thoughts were, you know, as we've talked about, that concept of class size reduction and a lot of those literacy type things, of the concept of rolling it into the WPU, but protecting that K-8 space as far as funding goes. And so it's like, well, you know, could we increase the WPU for kindergarten and then make up difference? But the WPU for kindergarten is much lower than, if I understanding the spreadsheet correctly, that this is the appropriated amount for those 3 programs, is that correct?
Correct, yeah, you
So-
had mentioned class size reduction,
Okay.
K-3 reading, and early intervention, so $157 million is what the total appropriation for 18 is for those 3
So it's
programs.
a lot more money that we need to somehow protect in K-8 than just increasing the WPU in kindergarten. And this was my thought process. But anyway, so it surprised me. I was expecting kindergarten WPU change to be much greater, and so it's just, why haven't we just gone that way? Anyways, but anyway.
Jamie, one thing that might make it more complicated, I think a lot of the facilities are designed for half-day kindergarten. And thus, to go to all-day kindergarten would require, you know, portable classrooms or some other substantial costs. for teaching.
And my thought process in going this route wasn't that, you know, if you fund a kindergarten student at 1 WPU, doesn't mean that they have to be in school all day long, right? And so that was my thought, is just providing the funding in that space, but allowing LEAs to be flexible in how they meet the needs of that K-8 population. And so it was just one thought of the best way to protect that funding, because we've talked about blocking, recommending a block of that funding, but it still doesn't provide for growth. And so over time, even that block would become, a stagnant number that may not be as effective in K-8. Sorry.
No, I'm just gonna share that.
No, am I wrong that there's?
Well, so one of the things that we're going to discuss later on today is the block grant, basically. And one of the things that are on that CDC list that we provided earlier are the programs that are actually below the line that do receive growth. And so if you wanted to make a new block grant program, you could see if the legislature could instruct that and have that get growth every year, even though it's not included in the basic program or within that above the line block of programs.
What percent of our LEAs or kindergarten students are in full-day kindergarten? We talked about those schools approximately.
I don't have that data.
We could get
We'd
that
have
from
to-
data statistics.
But I think are we 50th in the country in that? I think.
You check how many students are in half day or full day?
Even though I know that kindergarten's funded at 0.55, I believe some of our LEAs have chosen to draw down funds from other grades and fund and pay for full-day kindergarten. Kathleen?
Also, kindergarten isn't mandatory, which creates a whole different aspect of how we fund it and how it's received and who participates. So because it's not mandatory, it changes the dynamic.
Superintendent?
So, it's always interesting to think about, it's not mandatory, but we have, I think the last data showed, wasn't it like 98% of our students attend kindergarten? And I think we were at about 18% last year, 18 to 20% in extended day kindergarten. But we have to be careful with that term because some do all day, some extend an hour, some extend by 30 minutes. So there are all these different variabilities on what that looks like. And that's why we've stayed in that optional extended day range. I think it's higher than that now, though. I think we'd have to look at it. It's probably up to maybe even a quarter. Yeah.
Brittany?
Is that participate in the funding of those extended day programs, or does that include LEAs who choose to have some extended program of their own?
Very few have been able to use their own funding to do that. So we've got the OEK from a couple of different sources they could use. I think they can use K-3 funding for that now. They can use the OEK line item, and then they can use the early intervention.
And any other unrestricted?
They don't have work with partners. And then the private partnerships, I think so. So there are a variety.
So my question though is, so the number that you have is based on those who are actually drawing funds specific for an
I
extended
think it's just participation, the way that they're listed in the student system. But we need to find that out for sure.
And I'm curious, how does it compare to comparable states like Colorado, Arizona, Nevada?
Colorado fully funds full day kindergarten.
Okay, so we're way behind them.
Just anecdotally as well, I was visiting a school in Washington DC, and the person I was speaking to there, she was totally surprised. She's like, I didn't know there was a state left that didn't have full day kindergarten. So,
It's definitely national.
Well, I'm gonna put it in the minutes. 3 of my 4 children have gone through kindergarten, have gone through all-day kindergarten because we could afford it and we paid for it. I think it put them substantially ahead. Maybe it gave them an unfair advantage, but it gave them a huge advantage. My kids are ready to learn at that age, and we're fortunate we could. I think it's unfortunate that all of Utah's kids can't.
Were they in private? How did you pay for it?
Yes, they went to Challenger.
Oh.
We could pay for it. It was a big sacrifice in our household, but that's what we value. Kathleen?
My kids also went to all-day kindergarten, and it is a frustration for different demographics to have this opportunity available and other demographics to not have this available. The problem that I foresee is that the higher demographics, higher socioeconomics can find a spot to bring their kids and pay for it. Our lower demographics are being offered it because they are at the lowest demographic sometimes. And the people that are in the middle are not having this opportunity. So we are doing a disservice to the middle of our demographics because they cannot absorb the financial burden. They can't find a resource available. And the resources that are available are half-time and then have you compensate for the other half of the day. So when we look at equity across the board, there is some equity issues about which kids are most equitably served. And unfortunately, it seems that it's this middle class that's really struggling, and lower middle class, because they're not here and they're not there, and so we have that problem there.
How much money does the state provide combined in all the programs that support extended extended kindergarten? There's the OEK, there's the K through 3.
There's targeted funding and then there's possibilities.
Okay, so what's in the targeted funding? And are they state?
So
Some
you
of them
have-
aren't state funded, some of them are federal grants, is that right?
Well, so the state funded programs, you've got early intervention, which is $7.5 million. You've got K-3 reading improvement, which is $15 million. Then you could possibly use class size reduction, which is $135 million. And that's just the.
Isn't the partnerships grant?
Private partnership is preschool.
But the Partnerships for Student Success grant,
Yeah.
is that?
There's some grants out there. So we'll talk more about that in the literacy section today, in the study session, the possibilities that can happen. Right now, the bulk of K through reading is being spent on reading specialists, personnel, but, and class size reduction is, I know in Granite, for example, a lot of their class size reduction is spent also on the reading specialists. So thinking about, given all the funding that's a possibility, plus all the grants, there's a good amount of money.
It's a good chunk, yeah.
But then if you move the funds to focus on OEK, what do you give up to do that?
Superintendent, why do you think Utah doesn't have all-day kindergarten and so many other states do?
I think there are a couple of issues. One of the big issues that I was personally involved with the initial OEK bill, meeting with groups like Sutherland Institute and others who were opposing the bill at the time. This goes to Member Reedy's point. They feel, and I don't mean to speak for them, but the pushback is trying to keep children in the home as much as possible and not wanting government to intervene in the family, and thinking about, since kindergarten isn't mandatory, then being able to keep your children home with you as much as possible and have jurisdiction of their education. When we entered into the conversation about equity and students who may not have that opportunity if their parents are working and they're in daycare, et cetera, providing that opportunity for extended kindergarten, then we got broad-based support when you start talking about equity. So that seems to be the number one thing in our state, is just that family focus and the notion that children should be home for as long as possible with families. And that really got a reaction.
I think that facilities costs
Yeah, there is
a
that.
substantial, I mean, the logistical
How to facilitate it.
Facilities and transportation.
It's like we've
I know-
locked into beta and VHS has come along.
I think it would definitely be possible, but
That's-
it would take
that's
some
true.
planning and some build-out time to create the facilities. I think a lot of times, like with the TANF grant program that's creating extended day kindergarten opportunities, it's funding additional teacher time so that they're either able to hire an additional teacher or make that contract full-time, so that it's extending like an existing program. I don't recall, at least, that there were a lot of LEAs who were building all new programs, and I think some of the just kind of anecdotal conversations I had about that was related to space, that in such a short time and with one-time funding, it wasn't possible to acquire the space and the personnel to sustain that long-term.
If I can follow up on that, that's particularly true in our urban and growing areas where you have really jammed classrooms. But in our rural areas, they're the ones who are saying we could definitely fund all-day kindergarten for all of our kids if we have the money, we have the space. So space and transportation.
Because transportation's got to be very challenging for midday, just take the kindergartners home and pick them up.
Yeah.
Brittany?
Is it possible to, in our current legal structure, is it possible to fund an all-day kindergarten, like, or to increase the WPU value for a kindergartner without making kindergarten mandatory, nor requiring an LEA to offer a full-day program to their students? So it would be something where you could fund it, and then over time, LEAs could build a program that would allow
So you
students
just
to
fully
do
fund the
that.
K without requirement.
You'd have to, that would have to be a statutory change, because the WPU for kindergarten is fixed in statute.
Yeah, other than that one marker that's in statute, are there any other statutory boundaries that would be a problem? Like, so if you were to say all kindergartners now funded at 1.0 instead of 0.55, that would we have to change anything? Could LEAs make a gradual change over time? If necessary.
So one thing I can think of is this is a fixed amount of the WPU.
So 75 million additional dollars.
And funding.
Yeah, and the funding.
Is that our legislative priorities at all? Kathleen?
As we're talking, we're speculating on why people aren't doing it. I think it would be a good course of action for us to ask our LEAs, what is preventing you from having an all-day kindergarten? I mean, creating a reload for lots of school districts would be a one-time amount of money, and we could provide those grants one time to add a reload to certain schools. My schools that have half-day kindergarten already have a classroom that's being used for that, and smaller classrooms, it's empty half the day. So that we're making these assumptions that these are the things that are preventing us. I think we should reach out to our LEAs and say, what are the hurdles that would be one-time money? What are hurdles that would be ongoing money? And what are hurdles that would be community-based? Because for us to speculate is kind of...
Well, and I would just say it's not speculation. These are actual conversations with people where they've told us it's transportation, it's time, money, transportation, and philosophy.
So if we just ask them how much...
Your factoring with money would really be helpful.
Yeah. Because I understand that is definitely an issue, but like how much money would it be for Granite to provide 7 reloads in the schools that don't have it? And that would be something that we could provide grants for them to get to that point so that they could provide it. And then move forward on the other amounts of money.
Brittany?
Can you elaborate on the transportation costs for extra? Why would it be more expensive to transport a student that's there all day than students that come in? Or you just changing the schedule?
It would be the capacity of the buses. So where you're able to break the capacity up, you have one bus that takes a certain group, picks them up, picks up another one. You'd have to have 2 buses in the morning to pick them up and 2 buses in the afternoon to take them home, where now you're kind of splitting your capacity.
Who's driving that? Put my pictures up there. So what are you doing flashing my picture up there? Deputy Jones.
You're available now, it says. I just noticed that.
Did you notice?
Don't touch her, she's not
I don't know what that
available.
is. It's Skype.
Jared's
Gonna do a Skype.
Jared just walked in.
Yeah, Jared.
Thank you for this workshop.
Thank
Motion
you.
to adjourn?
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.